on racial, the one who fight against racialism. So here I'm talking about Hegel and Fanon today. You know, the famous problem in Hegel, it is the problem of the Lord and the bondsman, which is also known as the master and the slave dialectic. So there is a the sharp opposition between, there is an asymmetrical relationship between this lord and the bondsman, or the master and the slave in Hegel, because this relationship is something which is one-sided. Uh, it is the slave who is working for the master and who gives importance and recognition to the master, but at the same time, the master is not giving the due return to the slave or the bondsman. And similar is the situation with Fanon, uh, particularly in the African racialism, the problem of racialism in Africa, where this problem emerges, the problem of the master and the slave. there, there is again a kind of an asymmetrical relationship, uh, as Fanon has pointed out, that the white masters are getting all the importance from the slave, but in return, the white master is not giving the due importance to the slave. But here in this paper, I mean, I would just like to end up with a kind of an opportunistic note, uh, and that is also in line with Fanon, that some sort of mutual recognition is possible, because mutual recognition is something which was also there, though in the case of Hegel, what happened, mutual recognition, though the master did not recognize the slave, but still the slave, in their own effort, they work very hard, and they realize that we have to regain our lost identity. Now, the similar is the situation uh, with Fanon. He also would like to end up with an opportunistic note that there may be some sort of uh, mutual recognition. Mutual recognition is still possible, and we may hope for this mutual recognition. And he has pointed out that there are basically three main areas where mutual recognition is possible. First one is the we have to identify the differences. That is the first one. The second one is the integral role of action as it relates to the formation of subjectivity. And thirdly, the basic values of humanity. We have to consider the basic values of humanity, like love, life, etc. And with these basic values and with this opportunistic note, Fanon thought that mutual recognition is still possible. Still, we are still hoping for this mutual recognition. Now, I would like to begin up my paper. Uh, so this is just the brief of what I would like to discuss today in this session. Now, in the phenomenology of spirit, Hegel provides his exposition of the master-slave dialectic as an account of both the emergence of self-consciousness and the need for recognition. Hegel's line of thought came to play an important role in Fanon's critique of Western colonialism. Whilst the hand of Hegel can be seen throughout Fanon's oeuvre, in a chapter of Black Skin, White Mask, Fanon pays particular interest to the specific relevance of the master-slave dialectic for colonial societies. The focus of Fanon's critique uh, is on the role of race and violence. Violence complicates and adds urgency to the need for recognition. I would like to contend that an optimistic movement lurks in Fanon's work, which is articulated in a characterization of humanity, which could serve as a point of entry into mutual recognition. Uh, Hegel provides the master-slave dialectic in his work Phenomenology of Spirit. This dialectic presents a fable of sorts, in that it reflects Hegel's ideas on the course of history up to his time, but also the conflict contemporary to his time that existed between the French master and German slave cultures in the early 19th century in his native Prussia. The dialectic takes the form of an analysis of the working of self consciousness and demonstrates how the self can only become conscious of itself by the presence of and recognition of itself by an other. However, this process of self consciousness takes place at the expense of the other. The moment in which the self becomes conscious of itself, declaring itself uh, is an I, the other is negated and destroyed as an other. This is a perplexing notion. This negation and destruction of the other is a result of it becoming a mirror image of the self. This mirror image is the self's attempt at overcoming the other in order to become certain of itself as the primary and essential being in this world. Both self and the other engage in this process of self consciousness, and the result is an always unequal relationship of strict opposition. The master slave dialectic was taken up by Fanon in his critique of Western colonialism. According to Fanon, the dialectic is relevant to human relations in the colonies, but he adjusts the dialectic with a focus on the role of race and violence. I agree that Fanon's version of the dialectic problematizes mutual recognition, but want to contend that mutual recognition still remains possible. This article sets out to articulate an optimistic movement that seems to lurk in Fanon's work, where engagement with the other, that is, one's fellow human being, rooted in the notion of reciprocity, rests on a characterization of humanity that could possibly serve as a point of entry into mutual recognition. Uh, Franz, Franz Fanon's work was written in a context both similar and different to our own. We have uh, we have seen an end to colonialism, but its effects are still on, as is the unequal relationship between the West and the former colonies. The persistence of violence and racism in some of these former colonies in Africa means that Fanon still carries much relevance. Revisiting Fanon does not only result in a reassessment of his work, but also of our own context. This page, this paper will attempt to look at a specific passage within Fanon's work on Hegel's master-slave dialectic. The significance of this passage lies in Fanon's attempt to demonstrate why Hegel's dialectic is relevant to the colonial context. This passage is important because it provides some clues that could help us in addressing the problem of mutual recognition in light of violence and racism. Hegel's master slave dialectic serves as one of his most profound ideas, and it has left a lasting legacy. The master slave dialectic underscores Hegel's primary attempt at conceptualizing and describing the process of recognition on the way to mutual recognition. In short, proper recognition is the mutual recognition of one conscious agent and a second conscious agent. Mutual recognition allows both the self and the other to have freedom and agency in the development and attainment of their own self-consciousness. In other words, a cognitive awareness of the self and its relation to the other, and also to the world. Hegel's master-slave dialectic describes a specific form of human relations in which domination has a central role to play. This domination is at the heart of the need for recognition in the midst of a life and death struggle. In short, the process is this: declaring oneself as I is a reaction to becoming conscious of oneself to the presence of another. Declaring oneself as I is important because it avoids consideration of the self as a thing or object amongst other objects. However, in order to do this, one must see the other as a thing or object, and in so doing, negate and annihilate the other as a self that exists for itself. To demonstrate the working of the process of self-consciousness, Hegel incorporates the metaphor of the relationship between master and slave in his vocabulary, that is the lord and bondsman. The master is a consciousness existing for itself, which is mediated with itself through another consciousness. Once this mediation has transpired, the master becomes a being for self. The master becomes conscious of self only by virtue of the presence of an other. This other is the slave, who is the dependent consciousness, whose essential nature is simply to live or to be for another, which means that he is a being for other. The slave is inextricably linked to thinghood and cannot break free from considered a thing by the master. The master, on the other hand, ironically desires the thing that is the slave. Why this desire? According to Peter Singer, in the Hegelian sense, to desire something is to wish to possess, and does not to destroy it altogether, but also to transform it something that is yours, and thus to strip it of its foreignness. The master desires the thing that is the slave is in as much as the thing can be possessed, uh, namely by defining what a thing is. Defining the thing that is the other satisfies the desire of the master by virtue of representing an act of making the other the same as the self. The other nourishes the desire of the self to make the world its own. The master seizes power over the thing because he is the one who decides what the thing is. What is the nature of the thing according to the master? The answer to this is quite simple. It is something merely negative. The relation between master and slave has an ironic effect. The Lord, that is the master, achieves his recognition through another consciousness, that is the slave, and in so doing becomes dependent on the thing for his own self-consciousness. The saints of the slave become that of the master as well. As a consequence, there exists no manner of freedom, only mutual enslavement to the thing. The slave is dependent on his thinghood and thus on his definition as thing by the master. The dependence of the slave is held in place by servitude, in other words, a fearful consciousness in which one's whole being is seized with dread. The slave fears annihilation, in other words, death by the master. The slave sets aside his own self-consciousness, in so doing, negating himself by providing servitude to the master in an attempt to rid himself of this fear. The price the slave pays for keeping alive his servitude, which satisfies the desire the master has for possession of the other. The slave, negating himself, does to himself the same thing that a master does to the slave. This negation at first draws uh, back into itself, and he makes his own negativity an object and transforms his alienation into independent self-consciousness. This transformation is brought about through the act of labor or work, which finds expression in an object created by the slave. The created object serves an important function. The slave recognizes a representation of himself in the object, and consequently, the object serves as a motivation for the slave to bring about his own liberation. In short, the slave's labor sets him free. Through his newly acquired independent self consciousness, the self becomes aware of what he really is. His fear, at first muted and also turned inward, is externalized onto the master, and the master is seen as the object of the slave's fear. The independent consciousness of the slave represents a spirit of resistance and rebellion against the master. Through this rebellion, the slave comes to see himself as existing on his own accord by negating the object of his fear, namely the master. As a consequence, the master becomes other to the slave, which also heralds the slave's entry into subjecthood. The slave still fears the master, but overcomes this fear by seeing the master as an object and therefore a thing. The thing has been seized as the possession of the slave through his rebellion, and its nature is now his own making. What is the nature of the thing? According to the slave, the answer to this is quite ironic. For the shape of the thing is now a mirror image of the slave himself, namely an object that needs to be mastered, negated, and annihilated. Uh, Lieberman uh, uh, words this moment well when he says each subject objectifies the other. That is, each subject produces an object. The distinction between object and subject is an important one to take into account because it plays a big role in identifying the differences between Hegelian and Fanonian slavery, which will be discussed in the next section. Following Lonergan, one can distinguish two elements in the Hegelian dialectic that is crucial for this distinction, namely the primacy of concepts and the integral role of sublation. Firstly, in short, concepts are primary because of its provision of meaning to objects, which results in the grasp of objects. In this respect, the grasp of an object facilitates the move into being a subject. Secondly, this movement into subjecthood means that the object becomes sublated, meaning that it is consumed by the subject. In so doing, the object becomes dependent on the subject for its own nourishment, and as a result, its meaning hinges on that of the subject. The term object then refers to a self consciousness that is not able to affix its own meaning and, in so doing, bring itself to realization. The object's meaning is determined and constructed by another, and therefore it is a being for other. Therefore, a subject, in contrast, refers to a self consciousness that is able to affix its own meaning, bringing about a realization of self, which means that he is a being for self. The subject's realization comes at the cost of the object, which is sublated in the process, whilst its meaning is derived from the subject and must also be acceptable to the subject. Hegel's treatment of recognition ends with the slave turning the tables on the master by way of considering the master as an object, but this only happens after the slave regards himself as an object that needs to be transformed into a subject. Now, let me go to Fanon. The earlier was an account of Hegelian account of the Lord and Bondsman, that is the master and the slave dialectic, which I had already presented. Now this is an account of the Fanon's conception of recognition, also emphasizing this dialectic of the master and the black slave. Franz Fanon provides a specific analysis of the theme of recognition in the work Black Skin, White Mask. and reinterprets Hegel in the colonial context in terms of race, namely the relationship between the white settler and black man. In other words, master and slave. He picks up where Hegel left off, stating that man is human only to the extent to which he tries to impose uh, his existence on another man in order to be recognized by him. This presents a number of positive and negative things to be said about recognition. Positively, it seems that the desire or need for one to be recognized is a simple human attribute, which means that it is human to want to be recognized, both positively and negatively. One is only human if recognized as such. Negatively, Fanon seems to suggest that the extent of the imposition of one's existence on another becomes the measure of humanity. In other words, one can only be human if one ensures that one imposes oneself on an other successfully. It must be clear that from the uh, onset, the concept of humanity is now problematized, but it is also qualified as the bond between self and the other. This is clear when Fanon says, I quote him, it is on that other being, on recognition by that other being, that his uh, own human worth and reality depend. It is that other being in whom the meaning of life is condensed. Thus, I am only human if an other recognizes me as human. My humanity is inextricably intertwined with the other, even though it seems that humanity can only come about in the consumption of the other because of the need or desire for recognition. This need or desire is expressed in an open conflict between black and white within the colonial context. The situation is such that the white settler regards the black man as a slave because he does not measure up to the standard of whiteness. In so doing, the white settler asserts himself as the master. Therefore, the black slave mirrors everything that is bad to the white master, namely the negative characteristics of humanity. What are the negative characteristics of humanity in the eyes of the white man, uh, in the black man? The white man considers black men as machine animal men, quote unquote. They are partly human, partly animal, completely thing and object, and is there solely to perform labor. This is how the opinion of the white master about the slave, that they consider it as the machine animal man. Where there is at least some form of reciprocity in Hegel, Fanon points to a major departure in the colonial context, uh, which, with regards to the white master and black slave. The white master finds the black slave laughable and is not seeking recognition from the slave. Rather, the white master simply wants the black slave to perform labor for him. However, the black slave finds no liberation in his work, as the Hegelian slave does, and does not get embroiled in objectifying the master. He does not come to regard the white master as an object, because he never turns his own negativity, a result of his negation and objectification by the master, into an object in the first place. This is a necessary step on the way to subjectivity, and the black slave never makes this move. Instead, he wants to be like the white master, and he is fixated with becoming a subject. This situation makes him less independent than the Hegelian slave because he always considers the subjectivity of the master and never his own. The result of this is a paradox in which the black slave finds himself. He wants to be recognized as a subject, but the master will not provide such recognition because, in his consideration, the self, the slave is not human, but part of nature and therefore an animal. Sericu Berhan points out that in the Hegelian sense, nature is equated with objecthood. Therefore, the white colonial master's attitude rests exactly on a Hegelian presupposition concerning humanity. Human or spiritual existence is equated with self conscious freedom. In other words, subjecthood, which is on a higher level uh, than that of the unfree and naturally determined, namely the non-human. The master initially found himself on this level, but elevated himself to become human when he became conscious of himself, therefore forsaking his natural existence. This, according to Sericu Barhan, is the most significant movement of Hegel's master-slave dialectic, and it is a movement that the Hegelian slave can also partake in. This movement transpires when the Hegelian slave becomes a subject in his own consideration when he regards the master as an object. Fanon's black slave never reaches uh, this movement, but remains stuck within a fixation with the identity of the white master. The Hegelian slave turns away from the master and turns towards the object. Therefore, he considers the master as an object and in so doing asserts his own subjectivity. The black slave, on the other hand, turns towards the master and abandons the object. Therefore, he considers the master's subjectivity as something he wants himself. The Hegelian slave attains subjectivity, although he did not pursue it, whilst the black slave pursues subjectivity but finds it unattainable. In the final analysis, the Hegelian slave both disallows definition of itself by the object, namely the master, and being considered as an object as such, and in so doing takes hold of its own meaning. The Hegelian slave knows how to form an independent self consciousness, and his situation even becomes so radical that the master becomes dependent on the slave to affirm his own self consciousness. Fanon's black slave is not so fortunate and remains in an unfavorable situation. He does not create himself and is dependent on the master for his own self consciousness. Within this situation and bottom, as Fanon points out so succinctly, it is always, I quote him, it is always a question of the subject. One never ever thinks of the object. The black slave wants to be recognized as a subject and never wants to be regarded as an object. The black slave wants to be the center of attention, wants to be the subject. However, in the gaze of the white master, the black slave always fulfills the role of an object in four ways. First, the slave is an instrument against which the master measures his own superiority. Secondly, the slave enables the master to realize his subjective security. Thirdly, the slave helps the master in defining himself and the world. Fourthly and crucially, the slave is denied his individuality and liberty. Now, uh, let me go to the next section, that is the move into the conflict and violence. As Fanon has pointed out, that the, that how to gain the mutual recognition back, and that may perhaps be possible with conflict and violence. The situation between the white master and black slave becomes even more radical and bleak. The black slave's desire for subjectivity is by no means exhausted, despite the odds stacked up against him. He is a man crucified. The environment has shaped him, has horribly drawn and quartered him. He has an indisputable complex of dependence on the white master. The black slave cannot simply remain in the place that has been assigned to him, for he seeks to make an end to this. For Fanon, this can only happen through conflict and violence. According to Fanon, human reality in itself for itself can be achieved only through conflict and through the risks that conflict implies. Conflict, it seems, is a central feature in human reality. If one is to be transformed from being an object to being a subject, thus facilitating the entry into self consciousness. Fanon continues by saying I'm quoting him, self consciousness accepts the risk of its life, and consequently it threatens the other in his physical being, implying, it seems to me, that the pursuit of subjectivity by the black slave threatens the master's life. The desire for subjectivity for the black slave represents three things. Firstly, he wants to make himself recognized by virtue of his own agency, and he wants to assign meaning to himself as he pleases. Secondly, he wants to be considered as one that can desire and is not devoid of the ability to transform himself. Thirdly, he does not want to be considered uh, a mere thing. Fanon looks to Hegel for a clear articulation of the black slave's desire for subjectivity. Um, I quote him, it is solely by risking life that freedom is obtained. Only thus it is tried and proved that the essential nature of self consciousness is not bare existence, is not the mere immediate form in which is at first makes its appearance, is not its mere absorption in the expanse of life. Unquote. For Hegel, freedom exists only because one is prepared to take the ultimate risk to obtain it. Freedom is therefore essentially negative because it is not something that it is my right to have. Freedom is gained only beyond struggle, that it's something to be earned. This freedom is characterized by the ability to assign meaning to oneself. The reason for this is that self-consciousness is not bare existence, that is the being in itself, but rather pure self-existence, being for self. To uh, to recapitulate, in my view, being for self refers to the individual that has agency in terms of assigning meaning to one's self. the uh, the freedom and agency that is involved in being for self is not granted to the black slave, or rather, he does not grant himself this freedom and agency. According to Fanon, this is the case because recognition without struggle does take place as the white master one day, without conflict, say to the Negro, from now on you are free. Here, the white master's words seem contradictory as its tone seems normative in a sense, commanding the black slave to accept that he is now free because he has the same rights as the master. However, this is an attempt recognition, as the former slave wants to make himself recognized and be in control of how this transpires. Thus, he wants to be in control of the what in himself that is recognized, namely the image and identity conveyed to the master of old and also to himself, and yet the desire to be like the white master persists. The situation of the Fanonian slave object is described well by Hegel. I quote him, the individual who has not staked his life may no doubt be recognized as a person, but has not attained the truth of his recognition as an independent self-consciousness, unquote. This is indeed an interesting point in my view, and it throws some light on the idea of personhood, at least in the Hegelian sense. Personhood can be gained without struggle, but this does not necessarily imply that one has gained freedom or agency in being able to provide oneself with meaning. It seems then that personhood does not imply mutual agency and freedom. It is rather a question of what kind of personhood one gains. Is it a personhood of equality following on the master's decision to forsake his hold on the slave, meaning that he simply does not oppress the slave anymore and the slave has the same rights as the master? Or is it a personhood of superiority that was preceded by a violent struggle after which the slave has rights that are superior to that of the master? This problematizes personhood, for equal rights seem to be a fair trade, but also seem to be no more than a simple trust with violence simmering just under the surface. In Fanon's view, the black slave will only be satisfied if the dialectic is inverted and the means to do this is violence. The values of the white master are simply inherited and exercised by the slave and not transformed, transcended, or overcome in order to reach values that are authentically the slave's own. This leaves one at a rather bleak juncture. Is there any hope in coming to terms with the colonial situation between the white master and black slave? Is it at all possible to make the move from violence to mutual recognition on an intersubjective level? I think that such a move could be possible if one turns to Fanon's characterization of humanity, which could serve as a point of entry into mutual recognition. Uh, now, Fanon's characterization of humanity. So Fanon, in my view, provides three helpful suggestions in a direction of mutual recognition that forms his characterization of humanity. Firstly, the importance of acknowledging differences among people. Secondly, the integral role of action as it relates to the formation of subjectivity. And thirdly, the basic values of humanity. So the first one is the acknowledgement of difference. Fanon uh, reveals that the affirmation of differences between black and white is important. This does not mean that there are only differences between black and white, but if differences are stamped out, then forgetfulness creeps in of both colonialism's atrocities and the history of race and racism it embodies. How is this forgetfulness a problem? According to Fanon, the white man addressing the black man as brother attempts to convince the black man that there are, in fact, no differences between black and white. However, this is not done for reasons of brotherhood. The origin of this address, says Fanon, is much rather an indifference from the white man for the differences between himself and that of the former black slave. More importantly, it is also done from a simple paternalistic curiosity that the white man has in the black man, meaning that he has an interest in the black man as far as the former slave can be of economic and political assistance to the white man's aspirations in this respect. Under the surface of the rhetoric, according to which the white man proclaims black and white to be equal, there are ulterior motives. Fanon would have it that this is not actually an assertion of equality, but rather of sameness. It is an assertion serving in the name of economic and political functionality and expediency, seeking to ascertain the gain that the other can provide in this respect. Fanon opposes this uh, motivation and asserts, I quote him, yet the Negro knows that there is a difference. He wants it, unquote. The acknowledgement, maybe even the celebration of difference, is key to the formation of self consciousness. The acknowledgement of the role and impact of race in society is an issue that should not simply be skirted over. It could be said that a forgetfulness of race can even result in a forgetfulness or misappropriation of being, in the sense that people cannot properly develop a self consciousness in the Fanonian sense. Difference, according to Fanon, is affirmed in which he calls the maintenance of alterity by the black man, which means that the self affirms itself as fundamentally different in certain respects to the other. However, Fanon calls this an alterity of rupture, of conflict, of battle, once again alluding to the violence that waits on the horizon. In my view, at bottom, this is a reference to the self's resistance to its objectification. One can never fully be sure of one's own subjectivity under the gaze of the other. As Fanon asserts, I quote him, the black slave is unable ever to be sure whether the white man considers him uh, consciousness in itself for itself. This uncertainty motivates a call to action by the self, a motivation that moves one to assert one's subjectivity by affirming difference instead of seeking only sameness in self and uh, other. Now, next one, uh, I would like to highlight about the action and subjectivity. For Fanon, action is integral to the formation of subjective self-consciousness. In no uncertain terms, Fanon states the former slave needs a challenge to his humanity. He wants a conflict, a riot. The former slave is rendered active by the challenges from the outside to his desire for subjectivity. He asserts his subjectivity by virtue of this challenge in reaction to the objectification of himself by the white man. The importance of action as central to Fanon's idea of subjectivity is, however, a notion that problematizes and even undermines recognition. In this respect, the recognition model fails to provide the condition for the realization of the agency of the colonized subject, something that action does provide. Therefore, action seems to transcend the aims of recognition. Although I concur with the view that action helps in the provision of agency, I feel that recognition is left problematized but not necessarily undermined or left behind as something that had to be transcended. In my view, action and recognition could and should coexist as a means of attaining one's subjectivity. This I say because it seems to me that only once intelligent thought has transpired can Fanonian action take place. According to Fanon, I quote him, to educate man is to be actional, preserving in all his relations his respect for basic values that constitute a human world is a prime task of him who, having taken thought, prepares to act, unquote. Fanon is very clear about the significance and utter importance of action in coming to terms with the end of oppression. However, before one can enter human action, one needs to put what one considers to be basic values that constitutes the human world. These basic values, in my view, could serve as point of entry into mutual recognition, conferring subjectivity on both self and the other. Now, what are the basic values of humanity? Here, Fanon provides his selection of values that motivates action from people, those values that people pursue, even risking death in the process. He puts it forward as follows. I quote him, man is a yes. I will never stop reiterating that. Yes to life, yes to love, yes to generosity. These values constitute the backbone of humanity and also mutual recognition. Recognition of life, love, and generosity in one's fellow human being and in oneself. It serves only as a starting point of entry for constituting humanity as it properly facilitates mutual recognition and mutual subjectivity. These values also serve both as the motivation toward action and as the successful result of action, which implies that action should bring about a human society based on these values. Fanon considers action to be superior to reaction when he says, I quote him, Man's behavior is not only reactional, and there is always resentment in reaction, unquote. Here, Fanon follows Nietzsche in telling us that human behavior must be actional and that freedom is to be found in practice. This once again reiterates the point that action must follow on the conceptualization of values that are worth pursuing. The worth of these values depends on whether they affirm the value of humanity as a supreme good. Therefore, one must grant others life, love, and generosity as revealed in practice and demonstrated in daily life, in the daily interaction with the other. Nevertheless, I want to suggest uh, that reaction is not necessarily always a negative thing. Action in this case can also be a reaction against something, namely against transgression of humanity. These transgressions are conceptualized by Fanon when he says that man is also a no. No to scorn of man, no to degradation of man, no to exploitation of man, no to the butchery of what is most human in man, freedom. Humans are defined by their desire for love, for life, love, and generosity, but also by their desire both for freedom and the mutual subjectivity in which agency is afforded both to self and the other for the provision of meaning to one's own life. This freedom is both a value and a practice, and transgressions against it almost certainty result in a violation of human life. Therefore, one's action in favor of mutual subjectivity must at the same time be a reaction against scorn, degradation, and exploitation aimed at human life. These transgressions against the other also represent saying no to one's own humanity and inevitably result in the subversion of one's own subjectivity. Self and the other is inextricably uh, dependent on a simple and basic but mutually beneficial conceptualization of humanity. Fanon provides the starting point for such a conceptualization, and in that I find the optimistic movement in Fanon's unnerving reading of Hegel, namely a point of entry into mutual recognition. Now, reciprocity as key to mutual recognition. Fanon considers reciprocity to be a key element in Hegel's recognition. In fact, he considers absolute reciprocity to be the foundation of the Hegelian dialectic. Recognition that is one sided cannot work, since, as Fanon asserts, I quote him, action from one side only would be useless because what is to happen can only be brought about by means of both. Unquote. The search for an authentic identity and meaning to life can only be fulfilled in mutual recognition. The starting point to mutual recognition is the move from objecthood to subjecthood. This is a need that is integral to the constitution of a healthy and functional human society. To use Fanon's words, with liberty, each one of us is an isolated, sterile, salient atom with sharply defined rites of passage. Each one of us is. Each one of us wants to be, to emerge. It could be said that one primitively begins as an is. In other words, a being in itself, but one wants to be and emerge into being recognized. One does not want to be considered as an object, being for other, but wants to emerge as a subject, being for self, which importantly will bring one's self-consciousness into being. This is done on a primitive level with the corroboration of the other. The other must be present to bring about the transition from being for other to being for self. However, the other requires the same, namely the presence of oneself, to reach the same result, and as a consequence, a society of comparison is formed. This environment of comparison perpetuates the cycle of recognition, reinforcing identities and knowledge and bringing about a race of people that all share a certain sameness. Fanon describes this society of comparison as follows. I quote him that as soon as I desire, I am asking to be considered. I am not merely here and now, sealed into thingness. I am for somewhere else and for something else. I demand that notice be taken of my negating activity insofar as I pursue something other than life, insofar as I do battle for the creation of a human world, that is, of a world of reciprocal recognitions. At the root of the need for recognition is a simple conviction that the self has about itself, namely, that the self is not a mere thing, not to be considered as an object. This refusal to be objectified drives the desire for subjectivity. This desire opens up the possibility of independence, freedom, agency, and personhood. This desire also represents the move beyond life toward a supreme good, that is, the transformation of subjective certainty of my own worth into a universally valid objective truth. The search for such truth, for a supreme good beyond life, represents the creation of the human world in which one seeks reciprocal recognitions by recognizing that which is human in another. To recapitulate, mutual recognition leads to a realization of the value of my own life and the transcendence thereof in realizing the value of the life of another. This realization brings me to view my own value, but also that of the other. I of the other I so desperately need as a primal value without reference to life. In other words, a value that transcends both of us and requires affirmation in our actions aimed at each other. This is the basis for the notion of reciprocal recognitions, namely the infinite value of human life. This infinite, this infinity includes my own life and that of the other. With this simple but profound idea, Fanon leaves us with a simple task, namely to affirm the infinite value of human life in our daily interaction with one another. Now, I would like to conclude this paper with a note that the attempt in this paper was to show that an optimistic moment lurks in Fanon's sober and unnerving reading of Hegel's Master and Slave as it manifests in the colonial context. This is not to discount or deny the strong and direct message Fanon conveys in terms of the violence that transpired in the colonial context. Violence still plagues great parts of Africa, be it in the guise of war, terrorism, or crime. In terms of our own context, Fanon's words on decolonialization, especially in the wrecks of the earth, speaks to us most urgently, and there is no denying its truth in reality. The aftermath of colonialization is a messy and uncompromising process in which human lives are lost or seriously damaged. It is because of the troubling persistence of violence in the post-colony that one should mind Fanon's work for some hope amidst the stark realities of our times. There are a number of positive and empowering values that emerge from his work. In his in this paper, I focus on his ideas regarding the pitfalls and possibilities of mutual recognition, which reveals a positive description of humanity. So thank you so much, and I thank each and everyone. Again, thank the Indian Knowledge System and the Department of Philosophy, Munmun, and Professor Nataraju for inviting me to this very important workshop that you have organized. And thanks to all the audience for your patient hearing. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you, Dr. Arup. I mean, very well-read and well-written paper, critical, covering both the fields of Hegel and Franz Fanon. I have a couple of pages of comments that I kept writing all through when you were doing the paper, but preferably we will take one or two questions from the faculty and scholars who are attending before I attempt to enter into a discussion with you. It's always good that the younger students, scholars, anybody who is raising a hand, or you can put your questions in the chat box, or you can raise a hand and then you can discuss directly with Dr. Arup. Anybody is raising the hand? Anybody is there? The self and the other dichotomy and the discussions thereof, and the conclusion by Dr. Arup. Anybody? Oh, okay. I'll give you some time. Put it in the chat box. Put the questions in the chat box. For there should be many more by now. It is such an important discussion, yeah, you can type it in the chat box. I will read out. Okay. Meanwhile, I will for a few minutes I will engage. One thing that is prominent in the description of personhood, in describing values of humanity, number two, and in understanding subject-other relation. What is continuously seen is the underlying current is this desire for recognition. Is that the case? There is an intense desire for recognition. And then in the absence of recognition, the danger is that it leads to violence. That's the whole story of Hegelian followers. There is that intensity always, whether it is a case of the conflict between capital and labor. You take it the case of class discrimination in terms of capital and labor. The labor as the other is always interested in the recognition. Second, what comes to my mind is the case of gender discrimination. It is again the same, desire for recognition by the woman. And then asking the master to relinquish the supremacy inbuilt in the self as the subject. You are requesting the master. Now, my question to you is, why not, instead of asking the master to relinquish his supremacy thesis as the master himself, the very beginnings of our thought process, we have started with the whole discussion of the master and the slave, and we are establishing a strong dichotomy, considering ourselves as the other, in the sense maybe a caste discrimination, a woman, or a labor in the case of. My point is, why to die for such recognition in the first place itself? The very idea of the self as the other, considering oneself as the other, the very beginnings are so dangerous. Consider oneself as an equal in all the contexts, number one. Number two, least bothered about recognition. Hell with your subject and supremacy. I don't care for your recognition. I act as a self. I act as an individual. Again, I don't want to turn myself into a subject and treat the other as the other. I want to treat the other as the self, you know. I don't want to enter into a Vedantic terminology. I want to stay with Hegel and Fanon. I am trying to stay with Fanon only. I don't want to just bring Vedanta in any sense whatsoever in this discussion. My only this observation is there is an inbuilt eagerness, a lot of eagerness to be recognized, and the biggest trouble is that recognition never comes. The recognition doesn't come from the capital to labor. It doesn't come from the white man or a black man to a woman. It doesn't come to a Brahmin to a Dalit. We are waiting eternally because we already took it for granted that I am the other. Hey, why we have? I mean, why not get out of the dichotomy and say I'm an existing self. I'm a self. I'm least bothered about my being a master. I don't want to be the master. I don't want to be the slave either. And to act as an equal, in the very spirit of the equality, not bothering recognition. I'm taking out a heavy philosophical discourse from Hegel and Fanon out of their papers. I want your reflection on it. Why this eagerness to be called as a person? Should we be recognized at all? Can't we act in a sense of selfhood? I'm an equal. I'm an equal. And Fanon's attempt also, and he started supporting violence, as you know, and you have rightly pointed out, wherever British have left their imprint, only violence is ruling for the last 100 years. It could be Palestine, Israel, it could be Jammu Kashmir, India, it could be African nations, wherever they have put their foot. So beware of the European thinking is my, these days I start my class by saying that please be, careful about the European thinking. Please, Dr. Arup.
Thank you, Professor Nataraju. I mean, very interesting to listen to you. And you have made a very pertinent question, very pertinent remarks to me that, yes, this discrimination, first of all, it is there not only in the case of in the context of the colonial context, in the case of racism. Yeah, it is there in the case of gender, as well as in the case of caste. This discrimination still prevails, and this discrimination is something which is very, very important. It was there in the past, it is still it is still prevailing in the present, and hopefully it will also this discrimination will also be there in the future. Now, why this discrimination? And yes, in a sense you are right, that why this discrimination, that this discrimination could have been avoided, in the sense that why we are actually seeking for or looking for this mutual recognition. I mean, if we do not look for this mutual recognition, then this discrimination, suppose, could not have been arisen. But the problem is that, Professor Nataraju, that our society is a hierarchical society. Hierarchy and hereditary, these are the two very, very important factors. I mean, I am talking about in the case of the Indian context, and it may be possible, it may be, I mean, possible in the Western context as well, that hereditary and the hierarchy. So hereditary here in the sense, I mean, suppose in the case of racism and the casteism, what happened? The class that I belong to, or the caste that which I possess, and this actually comes according to the generation, according to the family and which I possess. So this is a very important factor. And for that, some rules and regulations, some customs and traditions that are also be attached with this notion of hereditary, and also in the notion of hierarchy. Now, hierarchy is because of different things. It may be a kind of an economic hierarchy, maybe the status of a person. I mean, the economic status I'm talking about, the economic status in a particular society, which makes the difference. A person, suppose, maybe belong to a higher class, but still lower in income, so still feels that that my position is low in the society. And that is why, that the concept of equality that you are talking about, though it is in a sense one sort of a solution, yes, if we think in that line, that probably then this could have been avoided or this could have been solved, that if we think everyone is equal, then then the question of mutual recognition would not have an arisen. But this equality will not come in this way until and unless these are already there in our psyche, human psyche. And since it is there in our human psyche, I have to follow it. And there is no other option, because this has been told by my tradition. This has been told by the family, by the family members. Okay. And there is no other way around. So I have to do it in that sense. And suppose I belong to a lower class, then mutual recognition is something which is very, very important, because I am not getting the due recognition in the society because of that. So one is that the hereditary, and as well, and the another one is the hierarchy in the case of the status, the economic status. It may be a kind of the social status of a person in the society. These make all the differences. And until and unless these differences exist in a society, though we may think that equality may be one sort of solution, but ultimately this equality will not come. This, because it is there in our psyche, and I am bound to think, I am bound to consider the another person as another, because I am inclined to do that. So that is the problem. So now, will equality be a kind of a solution? Yes, it may be a kind of a solution, but it has to be practiced. It has to come into practice. Otherwise, this will only be just a kind of an utopian notion, equality, that which, suppose, that Kant has talked about, the formula of the end in itself, that every human being is an end. Nobody is superior, nobody is inferior, nobody is a means to a somebody's end. So every human being has to be treated as an end. This is the third formula of the categorical imperative that Kant has talked about. Similar in the case of, suppose, in Gandhi, we talk about this Ramrajya. Where is this Ramrajya? Is this not an utopian concept? If we think in that way, yes, this is an utopian concept, because we cannot practice it fully, because this cannot be implemented in the society. But once it is implemented, I'm telling you, and I'm very sure that the solution is bound to come, and where there will be equality. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, now, I mean, I understand this whole discourse of Ramaraja. I'm not into this ideal equality, status for everyone. No, the point that I was trying to make was Africans colonized the blacks, or we are also colonized it in some sense. We do not act as though we are equals. This is my problem. I mean, we don't care about equality as a concept. That is not the idea. The idea is that the blacks acting in a way that I'm an equal to the white, not at all thinking or behaving or acting that I'm the other or I'm not the equal. What I'm saying is, the labor or the black or the colonized do not act as equals. There is the problem. It's like Indian philosophy people waiting for a recognition of a European, a German philosopher, or a French philosopher. Are we recognized by them? Now, I'm saying that Indian philosopher doing the philosophy as it is. I just do philosophy. I don't care for a recognition of a German, or I don't care for equality or being as an equal recognized by the XYZ. This is where I see the problem. The blacks do not believe in themselves that I'm an equal. I don't care for the whites' equality. or a woman not at all bothering or making lectures, but just a belief that I'm an equal. I'm an equal with man. I don't care who the hell you are. I'm not the second XXX, all the Simon Dibova, etc., etc. No, I'm an equal. And then you act in that spirit, not bothering about equality as a principle. No, 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 no. But acting with the very belief of equality, not bothering for recognition. And then still will the whites or will the men, will they still be able to hold the supremacy? That's my contention. When nobody recognizes the supremacy, will there be still holding on to their supremacy only because we allow them a chance to be superior, because we have a built-in thinking that we are not equal? The day when everybody realizes their own equality, not bothering for others, will that not make a change?
Yes.
My problem is that we don't act as equals. This is where the problem is.
Yes.
Everybody, in Indian philosophy, always wants a recognition from a European journal or a European philosophy. Then I say that you're not acting as an equal. You're bothering about a recognition. We are bothering about recognition.
Exactly. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Very good point that you have raised. Yeah. You are right that actually we are considering ourselves as another. That is the problem. We are not considering ourselves as a self. Rather, we are thinking ourselves as another, and this is where the problem lies. And now, I mean, this problem could have been solved, without any interest who the other is. I mean, this is, suppose I belong to a society, and this is where actually Hegel has talked about that, at one point of time, the master, once the slave realizes that the master is not giving the due recognition that the slave desires or the slave wants, then the slave gives a damn care to it. The slave thinks that, no, we have to work for ourselves. And this is the work actually brings the integrity among them. So work, that is the action which brings integrity and unity among all, is an important one. And if we work, I mean, irrespective of anything, suppose if we work irrespective of the fruit of action also, because I belong to a particular society, this is the task which I have to perform, and I perform it, whatever be the consequences. So if we are doing it in that spirit, then this problem could have been solved to a greater extent. And this is where, I mean, that Hegel actually say, the solution that Hegel gives here, one is the work, the another is the fear of death, because the lifespan of human being is very, very limited. That since I am here, that I born in this particular place, and I have a limited period of time to perform in this world. So during this time, I have to do the fruitful action, the work that gives the better result. So the fear of death as well as the action. And this has also been actually emphasized by Fanon also. The action, that we have to act for our greater integrity. And he also talks about the basic values of humanity. No, I mean, those basic values, suppose if we are inculcating life, love, and generosity, these three basic human values that Fanon talks about. Now, if we are actually really practicing those values in our life, then there is no point of any mutual recognition. Everyone is equal that you are talking about. Then we should not consider ourselves as another.
Here is a question in the chat box. Fernando Nixon writes, the master-slave dialectics, do they have any significance in the democratic society? If it doesn't, how the individuals recognizing their consciousness and the self of others? Yeah, what is the place of master-slave dialectics in a democratic society? That's the spirit of the question.
Yeah, it is very much relevant. And it is relevant in different contexts, not only in the case of racialism. So, racialism is a big problem in the West. It is also a problem in India. But apart from that, we have other problems in the Indian context, particularly in the democratic context. We have the problem, as Professor Nataraju has pointed about, that the inequality of the gender. Then the caste, the problem of caste. So, which has the class and the caste. So, Borno and Jati. So, these are the perennial problems in the Indian context. So, this was there in the present, this was there in the past, and it is still prevailing in the present. So, yes, it is very much relevant in the present democratic context.
Thank you, Dr. Arup. It was, as usual, it was good to hear you, and your thoughts. Dr. Munmoon, we have Professor R.P. Singh ji, who has joined. Good morning, Professor.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Munmoon, and thank you, Professor Nataraju, for giving me this opportunity once again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Arup. Nice to see you in the morning.
Yeah, good morning, sir. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, nice to see you after a long time, sir.
Yeah, of course.
We will also see each one in face to face after some days.
Yes. After the next week. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So.
Good morning, Singh ji. My Professor.
Very good morning. Very good morning. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Your new incarnation at JNU.
Yes.
So you will take all the Dasavataras, yeah?
No, I'm occupying your room, the one you left.
Yes, great. Enjoy it. Yeah. My books are there.
There is a legacy, there is a legacy for that room.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Dr. Munmoon, you are introducing?
Yes, yeah. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Professor R.P. Singh, sir. And I welcome you all warmly to this second day of our IKS workshop on advances in consciousness studies, Indian and cross-cultural perspectives. I request Dr. Nonglen to introduce our speaker, Professor R.P. Singh, sir. Dr. Nonglen, kindly.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for this opportunity to introduce Professor R.P. Singh. Yes, Dr. R.P. Singh is a former professor at Center for Philosophy, School of Social Science, JNU. He has been twice chairperson for Center of Philosophy, thrice member of Academic Council of the University Court, besides being members and chairperson of various committees in the university. He has also been twice member of ICPR and the governing body of the council, besides being member of Board of Studies of many universities in India. He has, to his credit, 20 books and over 180 articles published in different peer-reviewed journals in India and abroad. Besides being member of the editorial board of many national and international journals, his specialization includes German idealism, postmodernity, consciousness, Indian and Western perspectives, studies in ethics, civilization, and culture studies, Upanishads, Vedanta, Buddhism, human rights, multiculturalism, globalization, philosophy of education, etc. He also teaches a research methodology concerning dialectics, skepticism, foundationalism, anti-foundationalism, hermeneutics, deconstruction, etc. Dr. Thank you. I hand over this to now our chairperson, Professor Nataraju sir.
No, we will listen to Professor only directly.
Thank you, and good morning. Good morning, everybody. And it's really very nice to be present here in this national workshop on perspectives on consciousness. And last time also they had organized one such event, which was a great success. And this time again, so particularly the perspectives on consciousness and the way we are trying to understand it, its meaning, its significance, not just the knowledge part of it, but the meaning aspect of it. So what I have done, I've taken up the hermeneutic perspective on consciousness, and it has been very old tradition, both in the East and the West, and but you know, it is still pertinent because people want to understand this phenomena of consciousness in the context of current situations and everything else. So as it happens that we have to go a little bit into the history aspect of it, because philosophy and history are so intertwined. Our ideas are historically rooted, and in fact history also requires philosophical understanding to have the to know the foundation of history. So historically speaking, hermeneutics was used in the Greek philosophy, and also during modern times in very many ways, and in the contemporary periods in the West, and also in Indian tradition. The Mimamsakas had used it in a very substantive manner to understand the kind of language which has been used in the Vedas and the Upanishads, which is very much metaphoric, suggestive, and sometimes even paradoxical also. So we have to understand the actual meaning of it. So hermeneutics basically refers to the Greek deity Hermes. He is a messenger between God and the gods, and also between God and the human beings. Just like in India, in case of India, it is Nar Narayan Samvad, kind of, contention. Narad, you used to play that role. He was a mediator, kind of, thing, symbolically speaking. So, if we read Aristotle's brief article, which is also available in an expanded form, that is on interpretation, he is the first one to have tried to see the kind of relationship which we find between language and logic. So in that brief text on interpretation. So earlier in the Greek philosophy, so it was referred to the textual interpretation of it. Then we find that in the biblical Mount Sinai episode, where Moses interpreted the Jewish law, which is also known to be the truth to the people, because the people were all, they were all pagans, and when they were taught about the 10 commandments and interpreted by Moses, then another situation emerges before us. So we find that it has a long history, both in theology and in philosophy, in terms of interpretation and communication, finding out the spiritual truth of the religious texts like Bible and other things, and also the philosophical situations. So in a way, it has been very substantially there in the past, in the remote past, in the ancient world. But when we come to modern period, particularly the period of modernization and secularization of Europe and humanization of it, we find the nomenclature changes very substantially. Now we have to understand things in a different manner, and even Protestant theology also tried to implement it. So in philosophy, Delphi was the one who had tried to give an interpretation of it, and then it emerged into the phenomenology and existentialism in a substantive manner. Derrida has also done it. But what I have chosen is to speak on Gadamer, which I'll be doing in my next lecture. But today, I'm basically confined to the what we find in the Indian tradition. So there are three things which are very important issues in this context. One is that when we try to give any kind of hermeneutic interpretation, the language, the culture, the history, and the geography play a very important role, because these are very substantially embedded in the composition of the text, also the context and the references. Language basically means a kind of a text, which could be literature, it could be religion, it could be a law, it could be understanding, it could be the knowledge aspect of it. So this is all given to us in the form of language. Culture becomes a kind of a context with the content and the intent aspect of it, the universality aspect of it, the hierarchies, and the pluralities which are there. History, including geography, it can be regarded as the context and also the reference points, because history gives us the data, datability comes to us, locatability also is there in the context of history, and also the causality aspect of it. And the historian's subjectivity also plays very important role in the composition of historical texts. At the same time, we find that the role of the community and the tradition also play very important role when we look at the meaning aspect of it. So what I will do, I'll come to the way hermeneutics has been used in the Upanishadic and particularly in the context of Vedanta. The first thing, the kind of method which has been used into it is the dialogue, not the commandment. So it's a dialogic tradition between the teacher and the student, between king and the priest, and between two different intellectuals, even maybe gods and the mortal beings. So there has been several dialogues available to us. Dialogic way they were trying to understand it. Then we find that different themes which have been entertained. There is a pluralistic way of looking at it, because different symbols are there, so different metaphors have been used, paradoxical statements are also there. So all this thing is there. That shows that we have to look for its meaning aspect of it. Now, when we go into the meaning aspect of it, we find that certain meanings are differentiated and certain meanings are postponed. So the priest says that, look, the time for this kind of a meaning is yet to come, so we have to postpone it. Deferring aspect of it is also there. So it is very close to what Derrida has also used in the terms of deference. So while talking about deconstruction, various analogies and aphorisms which I'll be placing before you have also been used to substantiate the hermeneutic aspect of it. Analysis and synthesis is there. Questioning is a very important component of it. Questioning to find out the meaning of it. So both in the Upanishads and also in the Bhagavad Gita, we find that hermeneutics, this questioning has been used. Now, when we come to the aspect of dialogue first, so generally it's a kind of conversation, argumentation, and mutual supplement of ideas between two individuals. And with dialogue, the kind of encounter with another idea, that is sine qua non for this kind of an investigation. Because if both the parties agree on the same issue, then there is no dialogue. And if they completely differ, again, there will be no dialogue. So it is under certain consensus and also certain contradiction that the dialogue is stimulated and presented before us. And this dialogue is opposed to monologue, where which can formulate nothing but a dogma. The ideas I formulate to defend my position, my standpoint, must confront with others' approaches, must give expression to other thinkers as others, not as possible elements of a system in which I recognize my own thought. Other thinkers must be permitted to speak as others on the same subject. I am and remain as a participant. So dialogue is this kind of a process, and the search is always the search for truth, meaning, significance, and all that stuff. Now, dialogue has been used in the Upanishads, and sometimes in the dialogue we find that certain views are recognized as the Purvapaksha, and then there is a refutation of the Purvapaksha, and then there is the establishment of the Siddhanta, Uttarpaksha. So this is the way that the dialectics also emerges into it, because there is a contradiction and there is the overcoming of contradiction in a certain manner. So contradiction and the sublimation as the operative terms of dialectics is also there into it. And now some of the constants have been followed by the sages, because you have to agree on certain points, only then they will proceed. Like in the Vedic exhortation that, ekam sat vipraha baudha vadanti. The truth is one, but wise people call it differently at different times in different linguistic garbs, but the ultimate truth is one. So one has to accept this kind of a thing. Plurality, that their pluralistic perspective, different ways of looking at it. Europe came to understand plurality very late, in the late 19th century. Before that, they thought that pluralism means some kind of relativism and it cannot be a sound philosophical position. The other thing is that, Ano Bhadra Kritavo Yantu Vishwataha. Let noble thoughts come to us from everywhere. So we take it up as some kind of a constant, because this is something on which we all have to agree. Only then we can share our ideas. So far as plurality is concerned, we find that, there are very many ways of looking at plurality. One is that you go from one to many. That truth, ultimate truth is one, but it is expressed in different linguistic garbs, different situations. So we go from one to many. And the other thing is that we already have two or more than two substances. Like in Sankhya philosophy, we have two substances. In Nyaya and Vaisheshik, we have many more. And then we still go to much more position, from many to many. This could be another way of looking at the plurality in Indian tradition. And there is a sound philosophical position to defend this kind of position. The third could be where we go from many to one, the way it happens in the Bhakti Vedanta, Vallabh Vedanta, that gopis are many, but Krishna is one. So from many to one, they come. This is also a very substantive philosophy. And the fourth one is the way we find it in the Buddhist philosophy, that from Shunya, from nothing to many, Swabhava Shunya, that entities do not have their own nature. It depends on the situation, the kind of conditions within which they emerge. As far their own nature is concerned, it is Shunya, Swabhava Shunya. So these are the four ways that we can look at the dimensions of plurality in Indian philosophy, and these have emerged, from one source or another, from the Vedas and the Upanishads. I'll substantiate that position. Now, questioning has been very important act of understanding the text. And in Kena Upanishad, which is one of the very old Upanishads, so consists of an older prose section and some more recent version in which it begins. The word Kena means, by whom. So it begins with the question mark, by whom. And is the first word in a sense of questions, asking by whom the mind is projected. So it begins with the mind only, investigation to the mind. And by whom does breathing go forth? By whom is speech impelled? What God is behind the eye and the ear? The answer to these questions point to a mystical self that is beyond the mind and senses, but is that God by which the mind and the senses operate. So it keeps on questioning about it to understand. So where exactly it is there. Now this understanding, implies three aspects of it. One, the doing aspect of it. The other is the knowing aspect of it, and the third one, which is more substantive, is the being aspect of it. And these questions are, addressed to all the three levels. Now, these questions have been, further developed in the Upanishads, like the questions in the Upanishads are not just shallow type of a question that who said, and what did he say, when did he say, where did he say, and all that stuff. Rather, the questions show that there is some kind of a jnana marga, which is evolving in the course of dialogue and also the questioning tradition of it. And this jnana marga is something which is, the kind of vichar or inquiry which is there in the form of the questions. It gets tread mostly by those who have, natural and intellectual inclination to think and analyze their way in their speaking. So the way they articulate and express of it, if you read any of the dialogues, whether it is Yama and Nachiketa, or whether King Janak and Yagyavalkya, or Maitreyi and Yagyavalkya, so we find that the articulation is at a very high level. So that shows that there is a jnana marga which is operating into it. Now, some of the questions which are there, like in the Chandogya Upanishad, Uddalak asks his son, Swetaketu, what is that knowing which all others are known? Can we know the most fundamental knowledge for knowing everything? Most basic. And the dialogue is very longish one, and but very well knit, and every step has been analyzed and questions have been asked. It's not just in monologic manner. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we find that Maitreyi asks her husband, says, Yagyavalkya, tell me, Venerable Sir, of that alone which you know to be the only means of attaining immortality. And then there is an investigation into the nature of the self, which I find that is the first sign of a Vedantic thinking. Yagyavalkya and Maitreyi dialogue. Before really Vedanta came up with Prasthanatrayi and everything else, but this is one of the indications of it. Then Nachiketa and Yama dialogue, which is there, and it's very substantively there. The 6 questions of the Prashnopanishad, so that also is very important one. In the Bhagavad Gita, in fact, there are almost 27 questions, but the 12 questions are very important ones, which have been asked by Arjuna, and Krishna has tried to answer it. So this is the way that questioning is entertained, and it addresses the Jnana Marga tradition, the dialogic tradition, and the aim is to find out the meaning of the nature of the self, of human life, the aim, the purpose, and everything else. Now, there is another aspect of it, that is in the process of dialogue. If you read those dialogues, I have plenty of such dialogues before me, you'll find that there are various occasions where certain questions are postponed, sometimes for 12 years, sometimes for another 12 years. So they say that, look, the time, let the time for this kind of a question come to us. Only then we can, address it in a very substantive manner. So Prajapati in the Virochan dialogue is also there, to substantiate this position. Deferring is something which is there. We find that various analogies and aphorisms have been used to understand the meaning aspect of it. So analogy, generally we mean by analogy and inference, making it possible to draw conclusions about the similarity of objects in certain of their properties on the basis of the similarity of other properties. So it has been used at many places in the Upanishads. When, for example, the sage Yajnavalkya introduces the analogy of a drum. The conch or the lute in order to explain the process of the apprehension of self. Aphorisms are used for the benefit of compressing all the material of thought in short, pregnant sentences. So it leaves enough conceptual space for the commentators to provide as the best and the varied interpretation of them. So these metaphors, analogies, these and aphorisms are there to understand it. So some of the things which I'll place before you, like if we read Upanishads and the Vedas, we find that the statements in the Upanishads are so metaphoric, paradoxical, puzzling, symbolic, suggestive, and aphoristic that we cannot understand them without interpretation. Let me place before you some of such examples, in this context. Take the metaphor of Brahman. Brahman, Adrishta, Neti, Neti, all full, infinite, changeless, self-existent, self-delight, self-knowledge, self-bliss, Swarup, essence, seer, drashta, transcendent, turiya, silent witness, sakshin, nirgud, without any attributes, gunas, nirakar, formless, nirvishesh, very many ways it has been used. Even being immutable, eternal, and akarta, abhokta, kind of a thing. I take one example from Isavasya Upanishad, text 5, which says, and you can see how contradictory it looks apparently. It says, and I quote, that moves, that doesn't move. That is far off, that is very near. That is inside all this, and that is also outside all this. And this has been very well said there. Now, the need for a Bhashyakara emerges. So, Shankaracharya comments on this text. He says, the meaning of the text is that, though in itself the supreme reality is motionless, that means that doesn't move. It seems to move because there is a movement everywhere. Moreover, it is far off because it is unattainable by the ignorant, even in hundreds of millions of years. So intelligence moves faster in time, but dullness takes a lot of time. So ignorant mind takes many, many years, millions of years to understand it. But intelligent mind can grasp it very fast. So for an intelligent mind, it is very near. For a dull mind, it is very far off. So this is what it means that it is near and it is far off. So it is very near indeed to the men of knowledge. The reason for this is as follows. Being the very self, it is also very near. It is inside everything as stated in the Vedic text. So this is how we spell out the meaning aspect of it. And This is the role of the hermeneutic into it, to understand, interpret, so that it can be effectively communicated. Bhasyakaras do it, Vivrankaras are doing it, and very many ways it has been happening and getting done. Some other examples are also there, like when we talk about the notion of self, then how paradoxical it is. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it is said, the self is within all. 3.4.1 is inside this world, consisting of name, form, and activity. It is outside all this because it is all pervasive, like ether. It is inside because it is extremely subtle. Unquote. So you can see that it is inside, it is outside, both. Even intentionality, also some of the people like Balasubramaniam and others, they have taken up the intentionality aspect of it. Even Ramanujacharya also has done it. So generally it happens that in the phenomenology, intentionality is object directed. It is of the object, about the object. But in Indian tradition, we find that there is internal intentionality also. When you look or direct the intentionality to the notion of the self, so it has the internal and also the external, dimensions very much there. We have several paradoxical sentences occurring in the Bhagavad Gita also, chapter 13, verse 13. It says that, with hands and feet everywhere, with eyes, head, and mouth everywhere, with hearing everywhere, that Brahman, which is to be known, exists enveloping all. Unquote. One obviously knows that hands, feet, hearing, mouth, etc., they belong to the body only, because these are the bodily motor organs, sense organs, motor organs, and everything else. But then it is said that it can be used, to understand the whole universe. Aphorisms are also there. Some of the aphorisms, like they are used for the compressing material of thought in a very manner. The best example of aphoristic method we find in the Mandukya Upanishad. It is perhaps because of this method that the name Vedanta Sutras have been interpreted in so many ways. 8 to 10 schools of Vedanta on which I have worked. But some of my friends, they say that it may go to 1,000 schools of Vedanta, or more than that. That also emerges. So Om is the term which has been used in very many ways. So to translate from Mandukya Upanishad, we are told how the syllable Om is verily all that exists. Under it is included all the past, present, and the future, as well as that which transcends them. Verily, all this is Brahman. The Atman is Brahman. The Atman is four-footed. The 4 foot is Vaishwanara. These are symbolic expressions of it, but one has to look into the meaning aspect of it. So, who in the first foot, it is Vaishwanara, who enjoys the gross things in the waking stage. The second is Taijasa, which enjoys the exquisite things in the state of dream. The third is Pragya, enjoys the bliss, state of deep sleep, and the fourth one is the Atman, the Turiya state. All the 4 states of consciousness. In fact, the fourth one is not the state of consciousness; it is the pure, the being aspect of consciousness. So, but this is how it has been in a very aphoristic manner. It has been developed. Some other terms are there, like da, 3 times it has been used, and then it has 3 different meanings. And I think this is very popularly known to everybody. And nothing much to talk about it. Now, briefly, because I don't know how much time is there left. I think I want to leave much time for discussion about of it. So I'll just place before you some kind of brief understanding that how hermeneutics of the Mimamsa tradition in India, and with that the whole philosophical or the way they do philosophy in India is something which is substantially different from the way philosophy is done in the West. If we look at in India, we find that almost all the traditions and which have evolved from the Vedas and the Upanishads, they all have in some way or another a kind of cosmocentric approach. So the evolution of the world, truth-oriented. So darshana is some kind of anvichiki, tattva jnana, kind of an adventure which is there. So from this point of view, if we look at the West, we find that it is anthropocentric. Because for them, man is at the center of the world. In fact, when the world was created, man was placed at the center of it. Creation, kind of a thing. In India, in Indian philosophy, there is nothing like creation, kind of a thing. It's evolution, kind of a thing. Pralay and Vilay is there, but creation aspect is not there at all. But in the West, we have this kind of a thing. So also, if Indian tradition is darshana, darshana means seeing and showing. You see the entities, the relationships, the kind of world in which you are there. You see, and with the pramanas, with arguments, you are in a position to show it. Seeing and showing, these things are there. Very importantly, in Indian tradition, darshana basically means this kind of a thing. And in the West, we find that there is a criticism from outside the system, and once they criticize it, they repudiate the past. In Indian tradition, we do not repudiate the past. So because past is still alive, there's so many meaning which is still there. Now, there is an aspect of what is called the notion of time, the way it has been understood in the context of India. So it's not the same the way people understand it in the West. In India, it is understood in the sense of some kind of a cyclical time, not circular, but cyclical. Cyclicality is there, like a spiral binding, which comes back to the same point, but again, there is something, some way that it goes ahead of it. So this has been very, very substantial, Kala Chakra. So it's kind of chakra within which it has been moving. So time is there, Kala Chakra kind of a thing. In the West, the time is something which is very linear kind of a thing. And they have kind of contested in very many ways, yeah. So linearity is not there in Indian tradition. So, and as I had said, that the dialogic tradition is something which is very substantively there. So, and there's nothing like a commandment that which is given to us, and we just cannot change it. Commandments, one has to accept it. So, but in Indian tradition, with dialogue, with pluralism, with criticism, with questioning, with different interpretations of the metaphors, aphorisms, and analogies, we find that different philosophical position emerges. And there is enough scope. The language, Sanskrit language, is also very flexible in that context. It helps us a lot to understand the kind of dynamics which is implicit into it. So these are the general, very general kind of, I can say the habits of human mind in the East and the West. and that we understand it. Now, when we read a particular text, then, and this is my last slide, that how do you understand the text? First thing, that text, we all know that the original, there is an author of the text, and then there is a original audience of the text. But in the course of time, we find that the author dies, even the original audience also no longer they are there. So we are in a position, in a situation where we have the text before us, and all we have is to interpret it. The sutras are there, and then you have to look at the commentary aspect. The sutra from, to Yagyavalkya. Then we have to interpret it. Now, this interpretation is, the way we understand the actual phenomenon, because the original author is not there, though of course the tradition is there. The tradition is alive. The tradition tells us how to go about it. But in the West, people think that there is a text, and all you have to do is to go into the intentionality of the author to understand the meaning of it. The way E.D. Hirsch in the West, he has talked about it, that the meaning of a text is determined by the author's intent. And the reader has to understand what could have been the intentionality of the author when he was writing it. This is one way of doing it. The other thing is the way Dadamari is doing, and this I will do in my next lecture, about creating a kind of intellectual horizon within which it can be understood. But there is another way of doing it, what Paul Ricoeur has done. So his contention is very radical one, and he says that the text is independent of the author's intent. So who is author? Author is simply a scripter. He has given us the script. Now it goes to the credit of the reader to read that text, the script, and give a meaning of it. So reader is free to give the meaning, depending on the context in which the reader is there. And this is very radical kind of look at the hermeneutic aspect of it. And then Rona Barth and others, they have said that the author is dead, and with the death of the author, the reader is born. So reader is all that is the case. So many times we find that even the very radicals, fundamentalists particularly, they go to give a very radical interpretation of it, of this text. But these are the 3-4 ways that we look at it. In Indian tradition, we look at it first within the tradition, then in intertraditional and intertraditional dialogues is there. So all the traditions, they have been interacting with other traditions also. So there has been intra-traditional dialogue, and there has been inter-traditional dialogue, kind of a thing. So with the dialogue, the meaning aspect has been unfolded. So I think I should stop here, and we should give some time for question and answer. So it's over to you, Professor Nataraju.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. As always, it's there were a lot of thoughts worth reflecting upon after listening to you. Every time you come up with there is some discrepancy, but yes, Professor, I request the attending scholars and faculty to put it in the chat box, your observations or questions in the chat box, or you can straight ask,
So far, I don't see anything in the chat box.
Yeah, you can ask a question straight away. You can raise a hand and ask the question. That you can do.
Namaskar, sir.
Namaste.
Shailendra ji, please go ahead.
Shailendra from Magad University, Bodhgaya. Sir, pranam to both of you. My question is to Professor Adarasupally Singh sir, that आपने जैसा बताया सर कि हम मंत्र को, एफोरिज्म को हम एक कॉन्टेक्स्ट में लेते हैं, एंड वी कैन हैव मेनी एक्सप्रेशन ऑफ इट. इट्स अ ग्रेट थिंग. अभी जब आप बात कर रहे थे ईशावास्य उपनिषद के एफोरिज्म 4 की, जिसमें कि दो एक कॉन्ट्राडिक्टरी अपीयरेंस में है, बट उसका जो मीनिंग है वो कॉन्टेक्चुअल है. तो ऐसे क्या एक जो दृष्टि हमारे भारतीय दर्शन की है, स्पेशली जिसमें इंक्वायरी के साथ साथ रियलाइजेशन पे जो फोकस किया गया, इसको हम किस रूप में देख सकते हैं? मुझे बस आपसे ये अब एक अपेक्षा है कि भारतीय दर्शन को हम फिलॉसफी से कैसे डिफरेंशिएट कर सकते हैं एक डिफाइनिंग मोड में. सर,
दो प्रश्न है आपके. पहली चीज ये कि इसको हम कैसे फिलॉसफी और दर्शन में क्या डिफरेंसेस हैं. दूसरा, ये आपने बड़ा इम्पोर्टेंट इशू उठाया है कि जब हम हेर्मेनेटिक एस्पेक्ट को अप्लाई करते हैं तो ये केवल हमारा मीनिंग एस्पेक्ट तक ही नहीं कन्फाइंड है, ये बीइंग तक जाता है. हम उसको सेल्फ रियलाइजेशन की तरफ भी लाते हैं. तो उसमें the very being is also embedded into it. Okay, so these are the two issues which you have raised. Yes, I agree with you that hermeneutics, like in the West, they have tried to find out the meaning aspect of it, and so that it can be effectively disseminated more effectively than knowledge aspect of it, because we know many things but it doesn't mean anything. And we know we have very little things for the meaning aspect of it, but it means a lot for us. There are certain things. So meaning and knowledge, kind of a differentiation is there in the Western philosophy. But in Indian tradition, we generally find that the kind of language which has been used, if it on the face of it, it looks very contradictory, then we go into the deeper meaning of it, and that deeper meaning takes us to the knowledge of the very being of it. So we go to the very essence of it. So with the knowledge of the pure Atman and Sthit Pragya, some kind of, that situation. So knowing, meaning, being, mysticism, these are all intertwined in Indian tradition, and we do not just bifurcate them in different categories and then do it. Second thing is about philosophy and darshana, and people have been asking about it. In fact, 30 years back, Professor Nataraju must be knowing it fully well. In the 90s, late 90s, and the 2000s also, they thought that in India there is no philosophy. They have some kind of system of thinking, certain traditions which are there, and certain thoughts they have it, but it's not philosophy, because for them philosophy basically means some kind of critical reasoning aspect of it. Though the reasoning aspect is there, but they don't know about it. So there's, because of the colonization and everything else, it was there. But my contention is that, look, darshana in Indian tradition basically means it gives us a drishti. When you get certain concepts, ideas, you get some kind of a drishti. That drishti means that now you can see it in a certain manner, and also you can show it to the others. Seeing and showing. These two components are very much there. So you just not only see it and then realize it and you are satisfied with the being aspect of it. Buddha did it. He saw it, realized it, and then he started communicating it to others. All these saints, it's their job to disseminate it, to tell it others, to show it to the people there. In the West, Wittgenstein also has tried to understand philosophy in this way, seeing and showing aspect of it. And he has given very shallow kind of example that you see that it is raining and you can show to the people that, look, this is raining, kind of a thing. But in India, we go much ahead of it and in a more deeper manner about it. And that way we find that philosophy and darsana come very close to each other. And there is no such difference. Now, different stages of darsana in philosophy in the West, like when it was theological oriented, then it was reasoning oriented, then it was scientific kind of a thing. And in the postmodern, there is another aspect of it. So likewise in India, we find that all those elements are already there. Only thing we have to explicate it, in a systematic manner. So there was a time when people thought that philosophy and darsana are different one, and darsana is not philosophy at all. And then they wanted to have their own kind of, superseding everything. So colonization and everything. But now the time has come, and we all know that there is a U-turn. People are looking for India. That yes, there is reasoning in the Nyaya, Vaisheshik philosophy, how physics is there, and how cosmology has developed, how psychology has developed in India in the yoga philosophy, which is so comprehensive, the eightfold aspect of yoga, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, etc. All kinds of 8 things. So it's more comprehensive than any kind of, psychoanalytic or psychiatric schools in the West. They are now looking for it. So there is a U-turn about it. Thank you very much for asking it, Dr. Shailendra.
Thank you, Dr. Shailendra ji.
सर आपको सुनना बड़ा अच्छा लगता है. Poetic expression of philosophy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Here is a question in the chat box, sir. I mean, Fernando, you are there. You can ask the question. Fernando Nixon. You can unmute and ask the question. No, we can't hear you. Yes, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Sir, my question is, good morning, sir. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My question is, if the interpretations are very vary and different from one school to another schools of Indian philosophy, how could we clearly understand the concept of self or consciousness? That is my first question.
Yeah. In fact, you see, one of the definitions of philosophy is that if the concept is contested, contested concept, essentially contested concept, that means you have very many ways. Like I have water, I'm just drinking this bottle of water, and if I say that it is H2O, you cannot contest it. Yes, it is H2O. There's no philosophy in it. When I say that the water is H2O, then there is no philosophy in it. But if I say that, look, this is the holy water from the Ganges, then I have done something. And now you can contest it. Well, you will agree with it, you may not agree with it. So when this agreement and disagreement comes, philosophy begins. Yeah. So if it's a pure fact, the way scientists give out, or the economists they give us, so then there is no kind of philosophy into it. But when they contest it, like equilibrium in economics, they contest it. So then philosophy begins. Contestation has to be there. Now, your question is that how much contestation can be entertained? If they're completely different, then there is a completely different system of thought. The way it happens between Vedanta and Buddhism, or Charvaka and other such systems. We have classified them as the orthodox and the heterodox tradition, isn't it? So, but they are all well within the tradition itself. Like Charvaka, the Lokayata, they accept only one pramana, that is Pratyaksha. And other pramanas they don't accept. So Pratyaksha has been accepted by almost all the schools of Indian philosophy. So nobody has tried to deny it. And then they have also accepted the elements, 4 elements. So, and then they have also accepted certain values related to it, Vyavaharika. So to some extent, it can be shared, but to a large extent, they maintain their own identity aspect of it. That's why one of the fundamental position of Indian philosophy is that it is pluralistic. So there are many, ways of looking at it, but the ultimate truth remains the same, kind of a thing. And also they think that if there are good things in other traditions, let us accept it. Ano bhadra krito yantu vishwata. Let noble thoughts come to us. It may come from Islam, it may come from Christianity, it may come from other such traditions also, good things. It may come. So let us all be open-minded, kind of. That shows the liberal attitude also. In fact, the Bhakti movement from 9th century to 19th century, almost 1,000 years time, that was the most liberal period of Indian thinking. Yeah, where they started accepting many forms of divinity, very many forms of divinity. The people started accepting it. So Indian liberalism can be rooted in the Bhakti movement in a way. The way the libertarians like Locke, Mill, and Kant in the West, they have tried to understand. That's a different thing. And if the tradition is completely different, then they become a different entity. But within Vedanta itself also, we find that 8 to 10 schools of Vedanta has emerged. And they all have emerged on the basis of the same Prasthanatraya, Brahma Sutra and Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. Same text is there. Only its interpretation has been differently given. Bhasyakaras have interpreted it differently. So we have got a different school of thinking, isn't it? And there is nothing wrong in that kind of a thing. So, because we already accepted that plurality is the way of doing philosophy. Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
yes, I mean, his second question was, are we lost in interpretation? When are we doing the original philosophy?
Yeah. In fact, that the interpretation has taken away everything. Yeah. So if the interpretation takes the form of the discourse, these days discourse is a very notorious term because then you are really lost in the discourse. But if the text is there and you have the the dialogic tradition which is alive for the understanding of the text, then I think still the text the interpretation is still surviving. But when it takes the form of the discourse, and then you become kathavachak kind of a person. तो फिर एक कथा कही जा रही है, उसमें फिर इंटरप्रिटेशन नहीं आता है. तो डिस्कोर्स तो आजकल बड़ा ही नोटोरियस टर्म हो गया है एकेडमिक सर्किल में. People take it in different manner. But interpretation, how far can we go about it? Yeah. So I think there is no final interpretation of any text. So there is interpretation, more interpretation, still more and much more. But we cannot give the final interpretation because finality is found in the Judaism, Christianity, Hegel, Marx, they all have vindicated finality aspect of it. And this, I think, is not possible within Indian tradition. So the Western hermeneutic tradition is also trying to come out of this kind of finality aspect. Deconstruction, Derrida has tried to come out of it. Derrida and Gadamer had a dialogue on it, but it did not come out with any kind of, substantive position. The dialogue remains inconclusive between them. That I will take up in my next lecture. So, but this is how I understand this phenomena, that there is no final interpretation, at least in Indian context, in deconstruction also. And but those who take the finality aspect of it, then it becomes some kind of a commandment, and it's no longer within Indian tradition. So over to you, Professor Nataraju.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for your time.
No, my pleasure indeed. Yeah.
And anyway, I mean, for the participants, they can still think, reflect on the matter, because in a couple of days from now, again, Professor will speak the second part of this lecture. Yes. So you can reflect on this and then come up again for the discussion in the next lecture. Thank you, Professor. Dr. Munmoon, do we have the next speaker with us?
So I take your leave, Professor, and thank you very much to everybody, Professor Nataraju, Dr. Munmoon, and the team she has. Very, very impressive and very profound team she has, and working very hard.
Thank you so much, sir, for your time and for this very, very insightful deliberation. Thank you so much for being with us. Sir, you have your next talk on 31st Tuesday, I think. I mean,
yeah.
And before that, Monday, you are chairing one session, sir.
Yeah. That is in the morning session, isn't it?
Morning, one lecture, and evening, we have 2 lectures, sir.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I've seen it in the program.
Yeah, please, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. All the
being
best.
With us. Yeah. Thank you. Sir, Chairperson, Madam is there. Dr. Sindhu Poudyal, Madam is there. I mean,
please introduce her and then we'll go ahead.
Madam, are you there?
Please introduce the speaker.
Yes, madam, I'm there.
Yes, yeah. Dr. Nongin kindly, yeah. Good afternoon and welcome to the second day of our workshop.
Somebody unmute na, Nanglain, mute somebody. Some voice is coming in between. Mute, check it out and mute. Yeah, Dr. Sindhu may be introduced. Dr. Sindhu, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, sir. Thank you.
Good to see you. Good to see you after some time. Yes.
How is the new institution treating you, sir?
Enjoying. I don't bother for recognition. I am the self, not the other. So I don't care about recognition. I'm enjoying. I'm Atma Trupta. I'm satisfied within myself, enjoying the whole institute. It's a wonderful place to be. A good place to be.
Indeed.
Please, introduction of the speaker, please.
Yes, just a second. Running some technical issue.
This is the first time we are starting before time, I believe.
No, this is a workshop, so there is a lot of time. Only 2 lectures a day, and then that's it. Yours is the last talk for today, so, and everybody got one hour.
Yeah, right, sir.
Workshops are much better because they are thematic, and then they give more time for discussion than a one-day conference or a seminar where, recently with ICPR, with ICPR, we completed 120 research scholars presentations, each getting 5 minutes, 6 minutes.
Reading the abstract and just getting away with it.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me have this opportunity to introduce Dr. Sindhu Poudyal, ma'am. Dr. Sindhu Poudyal is assistant professor at the Department of Philosophy, Tripura University. Prior to this, she served as assistant professor in Chogule Autonomous College of Arts and Science, Margao, Goa, Mumbai University. Also, she worked as research assistant post PhD research for a brief period in the School of Humanities, IIT Bombay. Her specialization includes contemporary Western philosophy in phenomenology, Vaya Negativa of Advaita Vedanta, and the ethics of Levinas. She taught contemporary Indian and Western philosophy, Western ethics, Bhagavad Gita, etc. She published more than 15 research papers in journals, book chapters, articles in newspapers and magazines, participated and attended more than 40 national and international seminars in India and abroad. Also been invited to talk shows on Doordarshan Agartala on discussion focused on social issues and issues relating to women. Life member of Akhil Bharatiya Darshan Parishad, Mahila Darsanik Parishad, Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh Darshan Parishad, Indian Philosophical Congress. She is also associated with Board of Studies, member of Tripura University and several other universities in India. Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Longlane. Shall I start with the permission of the chair?
Please go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Time is yours.
So you are chairing, right?
Yes, very much. Yes.
Okay. So how much time do I have? 1 hour, right?
So let's say 45 to 50 minutes and then for some discussion.
Okay, sir. Yes. I'll try to summarize the whole thing in 45 minutes. So let me just share the screen. I believe this is visible and I am audible.
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Both are okay. You can put it into full screen if the slides can.
Okay. Yes, sir. Yes. So, good afternoon, everybody, respected dignitaries, all other resource persons of this workshop, 7 days workshop on consciousness. So I'm giving this an entitled theme of consciousness. However, I'll be speaking something on, it's a mixture of what are the things that are important even today when we talk of consciousness. And because consciousness got a very bad name with the Western influence of intentionality into it, it's not a wrong thing, but at the same time, intentionality is a very confined term, which however Heidegger wanted to establish it as a very broad theme. But then intentionality in itself is a very confined and an objective way of looking at consciousness that in the due course of this presentation I'll be referring to. So the thematic way which I will be presenting in this is the consciousness moving beyond intentionality. So what is this moving beyond would mean, and the cosmic essence which I will be focusing more is with the concept of microvita in it. So the this presentation has been divided into 2 parts. So the first part is about this whole of intentionality, consciousness, subjective objective divide and all. And then the second part, which I believe is a bit of novelty, which I tried to bring into this understanding of the consciousness, where I will be talking about the cosmic essence of being, so that the meaning of being, which has been explored and exploited so far, and then I try to invest this concept of microbiota into it. This concept of microbiota is not mine; it is P.R. Sarkar, which is which I claim that he is one of the contemporary Indian philosophers who has been neglected a lot. But then he gave a very promising theory, which is in the form of microbiota, which I have been doing past 2.5 years. I have been reading a lot on microbiota and tried to gather some articles, news, these papers and all with regard to this concept. So, but then what is this concept? We are going to see in the second part of it. So just to locate what is this microbiota and what is the significance of microbiota in this wide spectrum of the understanding of consciousness. We have seen that from yesterday, Dr. Munmun, and then in our two keynotes speeches. The first is purely and solely was on the Advaitic understanding of consciousness, and second was in a way a critique to that Advaitic theme. And that is what is also my question. So trying to bring in both Advaita and the post-Advaita understanding into this consciousness, along with a touch of Western understanding of intentionality into it. So the outline is introduction, why there is consciousness at all, and why we are giving so much emphasis to consciousness. And then what makes consciousness more important is the very nature of its transcendence. And then again, trying to bring back that transcendence to the phenomenality through the idea of intentionality. And then again, there is a gap. So there is intentionality was actually intended to, I think, with Husserl, Heidegger, Sartre, Merleau-Ponty to some extent, and Levinas too. They try to bring this concept of intentionality so that the understanding, the nuances of consciousness, which was so distant, consciousness had become an other, and then they wanted to bring it to the level of a face-to-face dialogue with the self. And then is there a consciousness in itself or consciousness outside of itself? So intentionality was considered as for almost 3 to 4 decades. This intentionality was considered to be the theme to understand consciousness from different perspective. But then there also Sartre, with Sartre's influence, with Sartre's questioning of Husserl's pure consciousness, also led us think that it cannot be a pure consciousness. Rather, when we talk of intentionality in consciousness, it still reduces consciousness to an object. So that also is not pure consciousness again. And then again, we'll fall in the trap of the same subject-object divide. So, and then the second part, I'll be talking, as I said, the cosmic essence of being on microbiota. Can this microbiota be understood as these different dots in this idea of creation altogether? And then the conclusion will follow after that. So, as I already said, to introduce this whole and locate this whole idea of consciousness alongside this idea of intentionality and then the microbiota, we need to again go back to that basic question, why there is something rather than nothing. So and then the answer was given by the West as that nothing cannot give but something, and this is why there has to be something. So, and that something, search of that something becomes the whole idea of philosophizing. But then the biggest confinement, or rather I would say the limitation of the Western philosophy since the time of Plato has been that there is always a self which is trying to understand the world. So there is always a divide of self and the object. So the tradition of philosophizing in the West with that same question, why there is something rather than nothing, leads to the idea that there is a self who is trying to understand the world. Whether the world is conscious or not, that will follow later. In fact, for that we have to give credit to Rene Descartes, at least in the West. So when Heidegger puts it that the Western philosophy is the footnote to Plato, but I would rather say that in the matter of consciousness, it may be Rene Descartes. So Descartes should be given that credit of, idealizing or trying to philosophizing consciousness. So this, with regard to consciousness, it should be the footnote of Descartes. In the West. However, in the classical Indian philosophy, again, if we see, to give prominence to the fact that creation is. So now this being is creation, and it is the exploration of the first cause. If we go back to the Vedas, the very first sukta of Veda is not about self or consciousness. It is rather about the creation. So the creation, whether it is the self-created entity or it is something else, that comes at the later stage, the first cause of creation, and it starts with the invocation to Agni. I'm not an expert of Indian philosophy. Why that is Agni, that maybe any other Indian experts can explore into that. But then the very first invocation that is articulated in the first cause of creation. So, however, neither for the West nor for Indian philosophy, consciousness was prominent at that particular, in the early philosophies. Early philosophies was to explore more on what is the first cause of perhaps the creation. So, and in that sense, if we look at Indian philosophy, then we give again credit to Shankaracharya, and then the whole of the tradition of Shankaracharya, and then the other dualistic traditions. So but Shankaracharya still holds that position of being the that footnote worthy philosopher. So but then Adi Shankaracharya's philosophy or Advaita philosophy, to quote, it becomes the light bearer or the torch bearer for whole of the Indian tradition. So any attempt in understanding something in terms of oneness or in a monistic way lead to the idea that maybe it is an Advaitic philosophy. But it's so the problem is it not a totalitarian approach altogether? And Shankara himself was a deconstructivist in that case, because he also deconstructed the existing tradition and tried to establish his idea that there is this idea of one. And then his idea of oneness has been again borrowed from all the Upanishads. He compiled, and what it was important for him, he took it and presented it in the form of Advaita. In that sense, I have taken Shankara as a deconstructivist. But when it comes to the totalitarian approach, after Shankara, the whole of this Advaitic tradition again started behaving like a totalitarian way. So in that sense only, this totalitarian should not be considered in the political sense, but it should be taken only in the sense that anything which is post Shankara or anything which is after the classical Advaitic philosophy, whosoever tries to establish something in terms of this principle of oneness, is it logical to consider that philosopher, that person, being Advaitin? So that is where the totalitarian approach needs to be questioned. So, and with this, now this whole idea of transcendence, now this is a question which I am posing to answer the second part of my presentation. So again, let us come back to the main theme, that is consciousness. Consciousness is always considered to be a transcendent element. So the consciousness, if it is, now the question is, if the consciousness is transcendent, how does it connect to the world? Okay, if it is transcendental, then how does it connect to the world? But for Shankara, it is immanent and transcendent only at the level, from the level of Paramarthika. Now, if the transcendental, now the another question which is posed by Kant is, and I think it's difficulty in Kant itself, is that if it is transcendental, how the finitude connect to the a priori structures. So if the things in its the thing in itself is transcendental, if the thing in itself is noumena, is the realm of noumena, then how can it tries to confine, how do we even get the idea of this a priori structure? So there has to have a link, right? Whether it is consciousness, even if it is transcendent, to connect it to the world, and there has to be this movement from here to that transcendent. So actually, if we look at from that perspective, Indian and the Western philosophies are trying to understand this one and the same thing, but the methodologies are different. But at the same time, when it comes to limitation, Western philosophy has its limitation maybe one step more than the Eastern philosophy, or at least Indian classical philosophy. And not only the classical, even the contemporary times, many philosophers have attempted to understand it in terms of several meditative techniques and all. So and that also has been again highlighted by the classical philosophies in terms of Shravana, Manana and Nididhyasana. So what is this subjective objective division, and that led to this whole Kantian difficulty, or even the consciousness being transcendent and trying to connect with the immanent, led to this subjective objective divide, matter consciousness divide, one and many, and all boils down to the fact that there is a leap in connecting the dots of givenness. Now, givenness, it could be the givenness of the essence of being, the very essence of being, or it is in this givenness of human understanding. The problem with human understanding is that we try to understand and comprehend the world in its totality, but we ourselves consider that we are finite. So we are finite and we try to comprehend that which is infinite. That leads to a very mysterious position, that leads us to a mysterious position, that what is it that we are trying to figure out. So the question is, understanding pure consciousness from another perspective, that is intentional consciousness, or going beyond even, could have any answer. So whether we are going beyond to this finitude, or the finitude of our being, or even the intentional consciousness in itself, or consciousness how it directs towards the world, so there is always a gap. So this leap or this gap is something which makes consciousness, the study of consciousness, even more fascinating. So, and that takes us to the pure consciousness of Shankara, or even Husserl. So the if we see it from a Husserlian perspective, he talks of the bracketing. But if we talk of if we take it from an Indian perspective, or especially from an Advaitic perspective, then it leads to either silence or to neti neti. So the very question that what is this Brahmanubhuti looks like, so there either the answer is given in terms of the apophasis, okay, or in a metaphorical sense. So all these upamas and then the examples which we give, and at the same time we say that this is not going to comprehend what is the Brahmanubhuti looks like, and at the same time how does it resonate to the view that we are trying to understand that whole of this consciousness. So consciousness in totality could be a misnomer, but we still have some form of understanding, or at least we have a clue to that. And that clue phenomenologists are trying to name as intentionality. Because when we talk of consciousness, at least for Husserl, Heidegger, and Merleau-Ponty, that when we talk of consciousness, consciousness is already and always objectively driven. Consciousness, it may not be object oriented, but it always has an object or a direction. So this is why I use the term objectivity. So it leads to, again, objectivity domination, even if it claims to be subjective. So when the moment we talk of direction, so that means it has to have a content, and that content separates itself from the theme, separate itself from its being. So even if we try to understand this being in its totality, but then the moment the intentionality comes into play, so even if we say that intentionality is engrossed in consciousness, but still intentionality retains that position of being conscious of something, and that something may be the world, may be time, may be infinitude, or it may be my own existence. So even if it tries to be subjective, but it is objectively dominated. And hence, the consciousness and intentionality, the intertwining of consciousness and intentionality, primarily ascribed to, at least in Husserl, it's the mental states, like even in Merleau-Ponty, it leads to perception, beliefs, on even to desires. And now it has been reduced to the brain functions and all. That is another very, funny thing to do. Hence, intentionality, being the essence of consciousness, is about or directedness towards the mental state. So at least within this structure, that intentionality, being the essence of consciousness, is about and directedness. So it is about that same consciousness, and also it is directed towards either its own mental state or it's towards the world. So in Husserl, all consciousness is the consciousness of something. So now this statement itself is very objectively understood about the consciousness, but at the same time it is very mysterious. So in Heidegger, however, though being is fundamental, yet it is only through Dasein's being that the meaning of being can be articulated. So the moment Dasein enters into the picture, so Dasein is always and already intending. So when the moment Dasein comes into picture, the whole idea of intentionality is surrounded towards the world. So it is no longer that pure essence of being. So the moment it enters into the world, it goes beyond all these given structures. So the Heidegger, in a way, tries to break the shell of the Kantian idea of, phenomena, noumena, and all of that, and he tried to give it a being-centric understanding, and that's the reason why he was very critical to Plato as well. So rather, he was preferring Parmenides's idea of being rather than, considering being from a Plato's perspective. So in Sartre too, again, this intentionality is a way to get into the content of consciousness. So in Heidegger and Sartre, there is a relational factor. But then subjective objective, who is a subjective object in the world? So it is subjective. It is about the subjective states of the being, but when we talk of intentional understanding of consciousness, it again takes us back to the object. And this is one of the very, very fascinating line from Sartre's Transcendence of the Ego, which is one of our favorite lines, is that we engage with our own subjective consciousness and cannot create it. We are merely objects in the world. So that itself is a complete statement that even if no matter what we try to do with this idea of intentionality into our own understanding of consciousness, we can only have the subjective understanding. So this embodied self's understanding of at least the limited understanding of consciousness. So this intentionality is limited only to the understanding of the self, understanding of the consciousness of the self, not the consciousness in itself. So consciousness in itself, and that cannot be that cannot be applied to the others, or that cannot be applied to the what is the consciousness, what is the intuitive experience or the subjective experience of the person who's sitting next to me. So that is where he says that it merely is objects in the world. So as a self, we are merely the objects of the world. So no matter what type of understanding we invest into this subjective consciousness, or no matter what subjectivity we include into this idea of intentionality and consciousness, it remains as an objective understanding, and that limits the whole thing. So that means intentionality in a way tried to establish a link between the consciousness and the object of consciousness, but it fails to understand it miserably failed to understand the whole of consciousness, because it again limited the consciousness into an object of the world. And this is why it is also a limited view. So, and that again, from there I'm jumping to my second part of analysis. That is actually, this is what is, I believe, is a little bit of novelty which I try to bring in into this understanding of the being as consciousness. I rather use the word being rather than consciousness, because it is conscious. The meaning of cosmic essence is itself being. So that means it is the Brahmanese type. So the is. So being in totality. So this divide of subjective objective, this divide of I and the other, this divide of one and the many, this divide of matter and the self, all this can be understood if we take this consciousness as being. So the again, this is borrowed from Heidegger, but try to give I try to give it a touch from a very contemporary perspective of the from the theory of microvita. Can this be a so in a way it is also also an approach to understand these dots, that because there is this being is not something which is given, and there is a mechanism through which it functions. So how that mechanism, whether it is Brahman, so how Brahman transforms itself into this world, and how to get this understanding of Brahman from the world. So going beyond and coming back to the world, there has to be a way. So and in a way, this cosmic essence of being, it's only an alternative understanding to this idea of going beyond this intentionality structure, going beyond that consciousness as being transcendent and all. And that is where I find it very fascinating, and I try to present it in front of you. So the meaning of cosmic essence of being is what the microvita stands for. Being in totality, in its alternative, is the constitution of the understanding from supreme consciousness to the cosmic mind and subtle subatomic cosmic intelligence, and which is where the idea of the subatomic cosmic intelligence is the term, scientific term that can be given to these idea, the concept called microvita. Microvita, the is the plural form of microvitam. B.R. Sarkar actually, when he wrote this, when he gave it is actually the series of discourses he gave from 19 it is actually the mature work of P.R. Sarkar, where he tried to give a discourses of over the period of 2.5 years, and it was compiled in the as the form of a book, which is the microvitam in a nutshell. But he talks of microvita, so that means there is not a single microvitam, so it is rather microvita, and these microvitas are the connecting dots from physical to psychical, and the psychical to the spiritual. However, he also cautions that microvita are not spiritual, but they remain to the level of physical to the psychical. So the physical, psychical, and then the spiritual. So consciousness, if we consider it as purely spiritual, or pure, it can be accessible only at the level of spirituality, then we have to accept the fact that PR Sarkar is also taking that stand. And then the purpose, what is this purpose of he is trying to establish is to replace the existing materialistic or the scientific rational paradigm of understanding of meaning of being. So the materialistic understanding, the word materialist does not necessarily suffice the Marxist understanding, but the materialistic understanding is a very rational and a very totalitarian approach. By totalitarian, I mean the Descartesian approach and the whole of the Western tradition from the time of Descartes till the time of even the phenomenologist. Because even phenomenologist and the psychoanalysis, the theory in psychoanalysis, when they try to understand the subjectivity or even the subjective experiences, in a way we try to rationalize or try to have a scientific understanding so that it becomes rational and it becomes acceptable for the world. So in a way, when we try to understand consciousness in that sense, that also leads to that existing materialistic paradigm, and that is where the totalitarian approach, I consider it as a totalitarian approach, where we do not allow other alternative perspectives to be added into this spectrum of understanding of consciousness. So the PR Sarkar's theory of microbiome can be seen as a missing dot of the thing in itself. Now, the thing in itself of noumena, of Kant, or even the transcendental element of Shankara, or even the maybe unknown factor which we have given to the consciousness, can that be understood through the theory of microbiome? Okay, so according to Sarkar, life is the ceaseless fighting to restore an unstable equilibrium. In the Anand Sutram, he talks of it is 1961. Now, this Anand Sutram is another text written in the form of sutra literature, and it comprises of 5 chapters, and it tries to give a complete picture from the creation of the cosmos to the social structure or the social reality. So the creation, according to him, is actually social. So there is a purpose of this creation, and that purpose could be the understanding of that first cause. So at least for human, and this is why his philosophy is humanism, and for that matter all the phenomenological philosophies are also human centric philosophies. And Sartre was so prominent in understanding and emphasizing that. He said that existentialism is a humanism. So when we are talking about human centric understanding only. So the essence of Anand Sutram is the composition of 85 sutras describing the universe, mind, spirit, and the society, and their inherent connection in the cosmic plan. So it is, in a way, he tried to establish it or tried to offer it as a complete package. And in that complete package, Anand Sutram, it is a purely philosophical, I consider it as a purely philosophical text which has Sankhya philosophy and Advaita philosophy to the core, with slightly a touch of spirituality and also of devotion into it. So but then microbiome, as I said, is a very, very matured work, and then that is where, what is this microbiome or microbita altogether? He first introduced the concept of microbita in a discourse, Microbiome, the mysterious emanation of the cosmic factor, and it has been, as I said, later it is been published as a text. So the emanated, so what is this microbiome looks like? So he says, emanated within the cosmic mind, microbita are defined as the subtle subatomic living entities that could explain our universe's progressive evolution. So the evolution could be a zigzag or a very linear plan. So it could be a zigzag plan, or it's a linear plan, or it's a circular plan, whatever it is. In the mathematical plan, it could be of different structures, but he considered it as a subatomic. These microbetas are the subatomic living entities that could explain our universe's progressive evolution. So by participating in the evolution of the physical matter, biological molecules, and protozoic life, individual minds evolved plant and animal species, and the evolved human beings with our rational and intuitional mind. So in a way, he tried to give a complete structural understanding of the creation from maybe a nucleus to the creation of the structured beings. So as I said already, he elaborated his concept of microvita series of discourses. So, and then these discourses comprises of many things. It's not only one thing. Say, for example, he talks about in the daily life how microvita affects crude and the different types of microvita, and he divides in crude and subtle microvitas. And then he talks of dimension of microscopic and micropsychic existence, and then how the rationality is played in it, microvita and the spiritual attainment, how microvita can help in the attainment of that. And then he theory of microvita and the possible effects in society, how the different aspects in the social plane, how they change. That is also according to him because of the microvita. And then it affects on the human body and the human psyche, human mind. And then he also talks of how these microbetas affect the luminous bodies, microbeta and their influence on micropsychic and the microphysic corporeal structures. And then he also talks of the plexi, which we call the chakras, or the central nervous systems, and the microvita. And then how microvita research can be taken or carried out physically, and both at the level of physicality, that is, he's inviting scientists for that, and how it can be done even in the very spiritual level. And then and there he talks of the relational factor of matter and the abstract. And then he also tries to explain the microvita in the whole of cosmology. And he tried to even answer some of the questions dealing with the microvita therapy. He even claims that this is not a philosophy. This cannot be confined only to a philosophy. This can also be understood as a practical philosophy, where we can understand the whole of cosmos, and at the same time we can consider it as we can create some new solutions for the new problems which can which the world is going to encounter in future. And it is very fascinating to see that the microvita theory is being popular, very, very popular during the COVID days. So in the COVID period, I have seen, while doing some research on it, I've seen a couple of papers and the books were published during that period with the name of how to understand these virus, and then the mutation of these different viruses, and then how that this understanding of microvita can even give an understanding to this different structural differences even in the microscopic beings, those which are accessible only in the microscopic level. So the thesis of this is that there is no antithesis between matter and consciousness. So whole of this idea that boils down to this thesis is that there is no antithesis between mind and consciousness. So the first understanding that needs to be taken care of here is that matter and consciousness are not contrary to each other. So matter is, according to him, in the microvita theory, is that it is the metamorphosed state of primordial consciousness. So that is perhaps is the first cause he wanted to establish. And the process of creation, is the supreme subjectivity. We can call it Paramatma, or we can, if we are a believer, we can call it Paramatma, or Paramatma's Leela, we can consider it, if there is no other explanation possible. Or if we are too rational and objectivist, then we can consider it as supreme subjectivity undergoes modification, or the process, in the process of crudification, until it reaches its departure point. Its departure is the creation of the solid factor. So that this whole departure from the supreme subjectivity, which is the consciousness in itself, which is the conscious in itself, or Brahman, or even Paramatma for that matter, who undergoes modification in the process of crudification until it reaches its departure point. Now, the creation is not this modification. Creation, the departure point is where the creation of the solid factor comes into. So the idea of being, which we consider, being in itself is that supreme subjectivity, and then the being which is taking a turn into the world is towards the solid factor is the creation. However, life is, according to him, life is created only when all the 5 fundamental factors, the Pancha Mahabhutas, available in the requisite proportion, and there is a nucleus to hold on to those factors. If there is not the soul factor, which is, I think this has a relation to the Sankhya philosophy, but at the same time, this nucleus, so which could be the factor of consciousness, to hold on into this factor. Each of these factor has nucleus, so the formation of the composite structure, or any structured being, or which we consider whether it is material or immaterial, having all the 5 fundamental factors as its constituent, must possess a presiding nucleus. So the nucleus has to be there even in the matter. So in a way, if we consider this, then matter is nothing but the saturated form of, or unevolved form of consciousness. This fundamentally necessitates that there must be some kind of self-organizing agency in the structure which brings these different factors into harmony. So all these 5 elements which are not in harmony, but they needs to be bring in through this harmony, and he considers it as that nucleus. So Sarkar terms this factor as the microvitam. So it is not that consciousness in itself has come, but then the modification of that supreme consciousness, when it gets a very crudified form, modifies itself into the into these different factors of being, then this microvitam comes into play. So it is that intelligent factor, that subtlest particles, and the ultimate secret behind creation. That's how he defines it. And I would like to read out some of these passages from, if the time permits, and because after this there is only conclusion. So P.R. Sarkar notes that this thesis that the continued pressure of the static forces, that is tamas, of Prakriti on the solid factor leads to the powdering down of the solid structure, that is known as Jadaspota, according to him. And the process of centripetal movement, Pratisanchara, sets in. Life is created when all 5 fundamental factors are available in the requisite proportion, and there is a nucleus to hold on to these factors. Each factor has its nucleus. So the function of the composite structure, having all the 5 fundamental factors as its constituents, must have a presiding nucleus. This necessitates that there must be some kind of self-organizing agency in the structure which brings different factors into harmony. This must therefore be intelligent in nature. So Sarkar terms it as microvitam. The emergence of the life again presupposes the energy, that is prana, must be organized at converted to the vital energy, that is prana. Energy is blind, like Prakriti. So it is devoid of the capacity to organize itself into the vital energy, that is prana. Here comes the role of microvita. So from the matter, so the link between the matter and then the prana is what he calls, here comes the role of the microvata or the anujivat, to translate it as anujivat, which according to Sarkar are the subtlest particle and the ultimate secret behind the creation. Microvata function as the self-organizing agency. Microvata are not of the carbonic origin. So the question of the science may arise there, that anything which is created or the anything which has matter element into it, it has to have a carbonic footprint. So but Sarkar says that there is no carbonic footprint in it. It doesn't have a carbonic origin. Rather, both carbonic and non-carbonic factors get their atomic structure from microvata. So billions of microvata create a single carbon. So the carbon formation, that means the first footprint of matter, is what is created by the multiple or the billions of microvata created in a single carbon atoms and account for its atomic structure. Then the question is, what are they? And then beautifully explains is that microatom, the source of life is to be traced not to the protoplasmic cell or the unicellular protozoa, but to the microvata in the domain of physicality. So when it comes to the objective world, they are subtler than the subtlest particle of physics, and in the psychic realm they are subtler than the ectoplasm, or which is in Indian philosophy call it chittanu. So microatom or microvata in plural are not protoplasmic in order, and as such they have got little to do with the carbon molecules. This is the quote from microvata. So and carbonic atoms, which are treated as initial point or the initial stage of life in the universe. So the consciousness getting into the object, or consciousness or the embodied consciousness which the phenomenologists are often claiming. So the point of the initial stage of life in the universe, and these microvatas are responsible. So far as the physicality is concerned, the position of microvata is between ectoplasm and the electron, but they are neither ectoplasm nor electron. Now, according to him, microvata exist in the nucleus of the physical structure. So any physical structure has to have microvata in its as a nucleus. So by changing the nature of the quantum of the microvata, the nature of the object can be changed. So with this theory, if we go by this theory of microvata, he even claims that there can be a structural difference in every objective being if there is a difference, if there is a proportional difference in these structures of microvata. So the nature of the object can be changed. Further researches on the microvata would reveal that the microvata are the real carriers of the character or characteristic nature of the objects. Hitherto, scientists have failed to explain how the the molecular structure in a particular being or maybe a molecule has changed drastically. So if the environment is changed, so in the very scientific environment, when we do the experiments, then the very structure of the molecule gets changed with the change in factor. But at times there are also instances where even in a very processed and a very regulated environment, there are certain structures which undergo drastic change. Say for example, the mutation of even the virus. So initially we thought that the corona has these many molecules, but over the span of 6 months they have mutated into different factors. So why did that happen? So in microvata theory perhaps could have an answer, because it says that both DNA and at the level of RNA that could change. So it is in the very initial stage of research. This is why I may not be able to comprehend the whole thing, but at least there are certain elements that are really important to talk of. So And then he even talks of this influence of microbeta in the psychic plane of the individual. So if the question is, if the understanding, or if the changes in the structural understanding of the microbeta takes place even in the body of the human being, so the transformation which we consider in human being, the question that how this transformation takes place, is it based on only the external factors, or when I am conscious and I am super conscious, and even even the realization perhaps, but then he considers, he cautions that microbeta is not at the spiritual, they cannot reach to the spiritual plane, they are limited only to the physical and the psychic plane. So if that is so, then these physical and the psychic plane are responsible in transforming the structure of the individual structure. So whether it is a body, so because we are embodied beings, so even in our level of consciousness, that takes place, because whatever takes place, it is through the body. Even the realization, or the brahmanubhuti, which perhaps we talk of, this is again my claim, it's not PR Sarkar's claim, that the brahmanubhuti which we talk about is possible only through the body, but then it is a outside body experience. But what is that helpful factor in making me even to inquire about Brahman? Say, if I want to know what is consciousness in itself, then even to desire to know that what is the consciousness in itself has to have a very very what you call controlled environment. And that is where the Shravana, Manana, and perhaps the Nididhyasana, that you need to listen to it, you need to contemplate on it, and you need to follow this pattern of Nididhyasana, of Yama Niyama Asana, and all of that. So that means we live in a cosmos which is conscious, and at the same time we live in an environment, or the cosmos, which follows a very mathematical and very calculated pattern of thought. So, and if these two meet, then he considers this theory of microbeta to be the that subtlest factor, where the calculation can be dealt. And he later on he gives different types to give it a very crude understanding and a very detailed understanding. He talks of microbeta in different types, their shape, the size, they can be of different sizes also, because as he said, the billions of microbeta will be required to constitute a cell, and then if that is so, then these connecting links, so that means we live in a universe. Suppose if we consider this universe to be a space, and these different aspects, including us, we are also constituent of something. So these integral elements through which we are constituted, and at the same time the thing which is now we consider as consciousness. So the missing link which was there in the physical and the non-physical, somewhere we try to reduce that gap through the understanding of this microbeta. So he, after defining what they are, he talks of the relational factor of matter and the idea. Even microbeta, according to him, can travel even through ideas, and this is why suddenly, so that can explain actually many of the subtlest elements of our psychic plane. So even suddenly one idea pops into the mind. So if we go by the scientific explanation, or the very materialistic explanation, is that we can experience, we can even contemplate, we can imagine only that we have experienced, but sometimes unexperienced things also we suddenly pops into the idea. So according to him, through sadhana, through practices, through spiritual practice, perhaps that is where the task of nididhyasana comes into play. One can attract all these positive microbetas. That attraction is, I consider, is nothing but the controlled environment in the spiritual plane. So he talks of types of microbeta, subtlest and the crudest type of microbeta. He also talks of the positive and the negative microbeta. It's not that only positive microbetas can be attracted, and how microbeta can even influence the plexi, the chakras which are there in the human body. Now that leads to a completely different dimension of the consciousness, or even the non-physical understanding of the study, and that requires a further study and reading, which I am not going into. And then how microbeta functions, he also talks about it, both in the physical and the non-physical plane, and how these microbetas are responsible in understanding the world of future, the world of the problems which are going to pop in the form of virus, in the form of new different types of disease and other things, and even psychosomatic diseases are also being understood, or and to some extent reduced if we have an understanding of microbeta. And this is why PR Sarkar promises and in a way invites the scientists as well as the spiritualists to work together. So these are not different domains in which scientists and the spiritualists or even the philosophers are working. So philosophers, actually, we being the students of philosophy, perhaps would be to bring both these scientists and then the spiritualists together, so that we can have a better understanding, or at least one step ahead in the understanding of this enigma called consciousness. And to conclude, so the question is that the mundane matter cannot be the whole of the universe. That is a very, very, very nullified fact, that this mundaneness cannot be the whole of the universe. And at the same time, the inaccessible transcendental essence of the consciousness makes it more appealing to human understanding. Because as Heidegger puts in, that Dasein is not a being which is conscious. It is a being who is conscious of its own being. That I am not only conscious, I am conscious that I am conscious. So that makes it more fascinating to talk about being or consciousness. And one of the alternative theories through which this gap of understanding can be reduced, that consciousness, self-consciousness, and objective consciousness through intentionality, this gap of objective, subjective, and all of that has been reduced, and it has been proposed so far by analyzing PR Sarkar's theory, which I tried to I tried to talk today was just the tip of the iceberg, because those scientists, the physicists who wrote about microbeta are very complex theories. I am yet to uncover the secrets of what and how they are writing. And as he himself claimed more than the 3 decades, that it is a combined venture of the science and the spirituality to uncover the secrets of creation, so that the gap of matter and the consciousness can be reduced. So the very question which I started this discussion today is that what is it that we are trying to get in? And that question was, is it a totalitarian approach? So the totalitarian approach that, okay, there is consciousness, this is the only thing that needs to be understood, whether by the philosophers or the spiritualists or even the scientists, that consciousness has to be understood through brain, is something, it's narrowing down that consciousness. Perhaps the consciousness is suffocated there. So giving some new wings to the consciousness to fly, and then maybe one of the alternatives, it is only an alternative, I still cannot consider it as a full-fledged theory, because that's how science works. It needs to be experimented, and he invites everybody to experiment it with science and experiment with the spirituality, and you will reach to a point where actually you are living in a very concentrated universe where actually this nucleus is trying to play around, and there is this centrifugal and centripetal movement which is taking place in that supreme consciousness, and that is what the creation is. When it extends, it becomes the creation. When it takes in itself, it becomes it takes the form of a small seed, and that supreme nucleus is the study of the consciousness in itself. But when it comes to the consciousness, which is the consciousness, then we also can have an understanding through this theory of microvita. And as an alternative, I try to propose it in front of the August gathering, to consider the contemporary, even Indian philosophy also has a lot to offer to the amalgamation of the science and spirituality together, and that we can give it a try to explore this domain of consciousness even in a very detailed way. These are some of the bibliographic information while compiling the whole of this presentation. And thank you so much for your patient hearing. And I will stop my case here.
Thank you, Dr. Sindhu. Yeah.
Any question I would love to answer, sir.
Yes, please.
I'll try to.
You can close. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I hope I am being intelligible somewhere. Yes.
Anybody would like to, you can raise hand straight and enter into discussions. Now, we were struggling to understand the Jiva. Now you brought Anujiva. What would happen to us? I don't know. It's so many centuries. Jiva is not understood. There is an Anujiva. Okay, but then good. Some new ways of understanding things, and then bringing into discussion.
Maybe one step ahead to the idea of consciousness. That consciousness not only confined only to this division of matter and mind, division of matter and something beyond than the mind, and also that there can be an integrated system in which we are living. So, and there is no difference between me and the matter. So there was one more book which I recently read by, I think he's from your own institution, sir, Professor Uttampati. He's a biotechnologist. He recently wrote a book called Mind Phenomenon. It's a small book, but very complex. It is actually based on this microbiome, theory of microbiome of P.R. Sarkar. And we had a panel discussion on that as well. So
Sarkar was a scientist or a philosopher?
He's who? P.R. Sarkar?
Yes.
P.R. Sarkar was a spiritualist, I would say. But at the same time,
he's not from some university system.
No. He's a spiritualist. He is not from any university, but he wrote extensively, almost 500 books to his credit. And he was also you can call
organization.
It is a very big organization. They have a big organization, but at the same time, I was fascinated more with his writing and the kind of new humanism, the theory which he gave.
It is all right, but is it science or is it philosophy? All that he is talking about, was he following the scientific method, empirical research, or was it?
Yes, it has both empirical research and at the same time it also has spiritual dimension to it. So it's not that he simply talks of spirituality, but there is an empirical dimension to it, and in fact he invites others, especially in his microbiome theory. He invites scientists to work more on some of the topics which he gave. And very interestingly, some of the books with the same name of microbiota, there are many books come out from the Western scholars. maybe we Indians need some more time to.
Somebody in the chat box is asking for Uttam, Professor Uttam's name of the book.
That is the book's name is Mind Phenomenon.
Yeah, somebody can type it there. Mind Phenomenon. He's a JNU professor.
Yeah, he's a JNU professor.
Okay, good. Mind Phenomenon. Okay, okay. And Shimi Madhavan, Dr. Shimi, you can unmute and speak.
Yes.
Sir.
Please go ahead.
Okay, Namaste, sir. Thank you so much. And Namaste, ma'am. It was really a wonderful talk. I was going through your paper. So many questions came into my mind because the term is very, it is very new for me, microvita. So I
Dr.
just want to
Shimi,
know.
you attended the ICPR Fellows Meet?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay,
I
you
was
were there
talking.
in Kerala. Okay, fine. Okay.
Sir, actually, I'm from Kerala, but I'm doing postdoc in BHU.
Okay, great, good. Good. Go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Shimi. Go ahead.
Okay, so ma'am, could you please tell me a little if from the actually we philosophers can understand suppose this kind of a concept easily, but as a scientist perspective, they would never accept this kind of a thing. I think so, and if we the concept of the microwave. Can we experience the thing in a subjective way or whether it has a objective perspective? Why? Because you has mentioned about the Acharya. I think he is not a, academic person, P.S. Sarkar, isn't it, ma'am? So.
Yes.
If he is a spiritualist person, definitely he would have to think about the meditation and all the thing. I'm telling myself I am also doing meditation. If I'm doing deeply into the meditation, I'm getting in a particular kind of a status. Suppose I cannot explain that thing to others as well as me also, what happened to me after the meditation. So whether I also expect achieving that particular kind of a status, if can we accept that one as a microwave or not? And is let's suppose barring that Acharya is mentioning anything about this microvita with meditation or not? That I just want to know a little more about that. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
That's a very interesting question.
Very brief, Dr. Sindhu. Very
Yeah,
brief.
I'll just try to summarize the whole thing. So microvita is not something you reach. Microvita is, that's what something he calls microvita is already there. So it's only that. So it's like, all the viruses and the bacteria with which we are composed of, the microvitas are also like them. So that they call it, he calls it at anujiva. So it's a jiva. It's a living entity, but at the same time, it can reach to the physical, to the psychical plane, but you will not reach microvita. So microvita is not to reach. Microvita is something which is already there. So, but then the way that when we are exposed to virus, when we are exposed to bacteria, similarly, when we are doing some kind of meditative technique, he calls it that the way you attract the bacteria and the virus infection, you also attract these microvitas, whether it is positive or the negative. But it is not only confined to the physical, but it also confined to the psychic plane. And to the question that whether scientists will be convinced with this or not, he in fact he invites scientists to prove it in the microscopic level. The way you have proved these different viruses, you need to advance yourself in developing those techniques where you can actually do the, just as I said, billions of microvita can create one jiva. So if that is created, now the moment it is visible in a microscopic eye, that means you require more and more sophisticated gadget to to even comprehend that in a physical way. So if to reach to that physical understanding, you need to have that sophisticated gadget, and then gradually when the science will progress, and this is why biotechnologists and the physicists are fascinated by this, that they wanted to bring it to this point where this idea of microvita can be understood, because he said that they can even function in the physical and the psychical. Now psychical is a matter of meditation, but the physical is the matter of the scientific evolution. That's what he proposes. I hope that answered your question, Shimi, ma'am. Yeah.
It's difficult. It's difficult. Anujiva, you know, for science it is difficult, and for philosophers also you are very difficult. Your talk was, you know, both the fields it is very difficult. No, already
to mitigate maybe.
I don't know. Already there is, it takes into consideration that there is a division between consciousness and matter. Why to take that hypothesis? Number one, that's a huge question. Why to start with the talk that there is a division between consciousness and matter? Number one.
No, first of all, he said
why
that
posit something more than consciousness again? Why
no,
another microvita into consciousness?
No, he simply negates that there is a division. The first point of hypothesis is there is no division between mind and matter. The first thesis is that it is consciousness. It is consciousness which gets into the different modification. But if we consider the division, there is a problem. If we do not consider the division hypothetically, there is not going to be a problem. That's what he is claiming. The problem is there where there is duality. When there is no duality, the problem can be understood in a very linear way. The duality has created multiple dimensional problems. But he is trying to again bring back to the Advaitic way, where he is saying that there is no division at all. It is ultimately the Parampurusha. It is ultimately that supreme consciousness which is getting modified into matter. And
then
again,
why do we need the help of this linking microvitas? It is a one continuous continuum. One consciousness is one field, one continuum. Why do we need the linkages then?
But then how do you, it's like, you know, getting into a
it is one field, that's all. It is just one field, one unified field.
That is Advaita, sir.
It is connected, one unified field. We don't need another
linkage in the sense, say for example, that consciousness in itself is it accessible?
I mean, I agree, but I have two ways of doing things. One is either it has to be scientific or it has to be a Shabda Pramana. In the case of a microvita, I don't think science would agree, nor is there a Shabda Pramana to prove that there is an Anujiva. Is there a Shabda or a science? Which is the Pramana for microvita? What is the Pramana?
Pramana is that it is. like Shankara. So what is the lokash of Brahman? The same question which again haunches me.
There is a Shabda Pramana for him. He falls back on Shabda Pramana, but where is Shabda Pramana for at least microvita?
So here he says he is giving twofold ways. Either you experiment it in the form of matter, or you experiment it in your own self. It's a subjective experience. And then the subjective experience overpowers. This is where the spirituality comes into play.
Anybody, Dr. Munmoon?
No, it was a nice paper.
We know only Bornavita.
Yeah. No, what I found, it was interesting. I mean, last time also Madam made a paper on this topic, related to this concept. And somehow I feel that this understanding of, P.R. Sarkar about the cosmic consciousness or microvita, is it that something he was influenced by, say, Aurobindo's kind of understanding? Where he talks about Chit Shakti, Metta Shakti as also a form of consciousness, and which has its root, I think, I don't know whether P.R. Sarkar accepts or not, but I think it has its root in Tantra, in the Agama Shastras. And the same understanding what I mean, yesterday, our first keynote speaker, Professor Nataraju, discussed when he discussed it from Vedantic standpoint, and somehow when Tanesha Timilsina sir has discussed, he discussed it from Tantric standpoint. That's how he developed the panpsychism theory. So I think that the root is somewhere there already in the Vedantic understanding of cosmic consciousness. So these are like how, I mean, these things are related. I mean, how do you respond to this? I mean, is he influenced by CRM in this kind of understanding, or yeah, or some tantric kind of
Exactly.
interpretation of?
Yes, it is actually, he is influenced by the tantric practices. In fact, he calls it that one of the ways through which it can be done is through the Dakshina Tantra. And he also refers to the idea that it is Advaitic in a way. It is the Advaita, Dvaita, and Advaita. So it is Advaita at the initial stage, and which reaches the Dvaita state. So then the matter and consciousness division. And then ultimately it has to boil down to the fact that there is only Advaita. So it is Advaita philosophy only. It is a pure influence of Advaita and the Sankhya Sastras. I see that Ananda Sutram, when I read Ananda Sutram for the first time, I find it a combination of Advaita and the Sankhya philosophy. And then later on, with a touch of Tantra, because in the 4th chapter, he talks of Tantra. And in the 5th chapter, again, he reaches to the social self. And the social self, this is why is equally important when we consider the consciousness through intentionality. So the intentionality is actually taking consciousness to the world, towards the world. So that towards the world, according to Sarkar, is the social self. Consciousness, once it reaches its maximum, it overflows towards the world, and that's what he considers it as universalism. It's a form of universalism which he terms as neo-humanism. So neo-humanism, according to him, is a love for the divine. So that love for the divine has to be unconditional, and it will become unconditional only when a person reaches a state spiritually, and until and unless a person reaches that state. Now for that, he also gives reference to Tantra. He also gives reference to meditation, the normal understanding of meditation, and also it takes it into the theoretical plane and the scientific plane. He invites scientists. He says that this is going to be only a rhetoric if we do not establish it in scientific way. And this is why he says you do the research in laboratories about the microvita in different dimensions and in different proportions. He in fact says that an amount of microvita, if it is added or reduced, the quality of an object will change, the DNA itself will change. So that is where the physicality and non-physicality will meet. And that's why science also accepts the fact that DNA is that structure which is the utmost structure or the primitive structure through which the body can be explained, right? And then the body and the beyond body structures come into play with DNA. So he says there also you can make changes with the changes in microbiota. So it's a very subtle, because we do not have any access to it. It is also like saying that Brahman is, but we do not know how to experience it. So once, and the person who experiences it takes recourse to silence or considers that it is not a matter of discourse. So, but maybe in future, this is why he considered it as a futuristic study rather than, confining it into the limited scientific resources.
Any chat box questions are there? No, everybody is
saying. I think there is one, sir.
Just
Lok Chetana may be given name to microveta. Yeah, Shailendraji is giving Loka Chetana.
Do you see the relation?
Do you see any relation microveta and the transmigration of the souls? That is a very different question. But then transmigration of the souls is again the same thing, which is like, you know, how can we link the transmigration and swap, that is a principle to connect this transmigration. So maybe this can also lead to that, because also it, as I said, if he even claims that if it, at the level of if they with the changes in microbeta, there will be changes in DNA and RNA structure of an object or the embodiment, then maybe this answer of the transmigration could also be understood, but I am not in a position to accept it at this moment. I'm just trying to confine it to the understanding of consciousness of
Thank
the mind.
everybody, Dr. Munmoon. Yeah.
Yeah, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes,
Your
we can
comments and observations.
wind up and meet again tomorrow.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are meeting tomorrow, and I thank Chairperson sir for this chairing session and his for sharing his valuable comments and observation. And I also thank all the three speakers, Dr. Arup Jyoti sir and Professor R.P. Singh sir, and also Dr. Sindhu Poudyal madam for their extremely insightful and elaborate discussion. We are meeting tomorrow again, and tomorrow we have evening sessions. We have 3 lectures tomorrow, starting around like 4 evening. We have Professor Ajay Verma, then Professor David Sharp, and we have Professor Bhagat. So I request all our participants to join us tomorrow for the 3rd day of our workshop. And don't miss the lectures. We are keeping attendance record. So that's all. With this, we are winding up the session. Thank you. Thank you once again, everyone, for your kind presence and for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Munmoon, madam. Thank you so much, Professor Nataraju, for giving this opportunity. Thank you so much. And to all the participants.
Madam, thank you for your time and for your talk. Thank you so much, madam. Thank you, everyone. I thank all the participants for being with us.
I'll leave the meeting. Okay, ma'am?